Hello, everyone. I will read the script for remotely conducted open meetings, so bear with me here. Erica, everything good? Okay. This open meeting of the Select Board is being conducted remotely pursuant to the Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, Select Board is convening by video conference via Zoom webinar as posted on the town website, identifying how the public may join. Please note this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participated by video conference. We're going to confirm member access. We'll start with board members first. Just to identify that you're here and you can hear me. Melissa Murphy.
Here.
Matt Fee.
Here.
And Don Holgate. There's a lot of boxes. Well, we have a quorum. Maybe Don's on her way. Okay, now we'll go to staff, and the boxes are jumping around. So if I miss anybody, please let me know. Erica Mooney.
Present.
Brian Turbot.
In attendance.
Libby Gibson.
In attendance.
Amy Baxter.
I'm here.
Chuck Larson.
Here.
Holly Backus.
Present.
Esmeralda Martinez.
Present.
Roberto Santamaria.
Here.
Jeff Carlson.
Good afternoon.
Vince Murphy.
Here.
And let's see, there's Chief Pittman.
I'm here.
David Gray, I see you there. Andrew Vorse.
Yes, here.
Thank you. David's looking for the mute button. If you can hear me. Let's see, Chief Murphy.
Good evening.
And did I miss anybody?
Jason, I'm here now.
Oh, hi, Don. Thank you. And we'll see other anticipated speakers. Dan Sheehan from Weston and Sampson.
Here.
Thank you. Go through. Kent Nichols, Weston and Sampson.
I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan Fitch, here for the HDC appeal.
Yes, I am present.
Thank you.
Thank
And we have
you.
Gary Shaw from Nantucket Cottage Hospital. Hi, Gary.
I'm present.
And Steve Penderson, Weston and Sampson. I think I got
Yep, I am here.
all the boxes.
Chris Klobacki.
Yeah, Jason, I'm on here too.
Sorry, I got two pages, so I'm going to say hi, Chris. And then Abby Camp from HGC. Okay, that's all the speakers. We're using Zoom webinar for meetings, which allows for the public to participate in these meetings. The registration link can be found in the description of the Nantucket Government TV YouTube live feed for the meeting. All supporting materials that have been provided to the members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. A couple housekeeping things. Please stay muted until your agenda item comes up, and please turn off your video until your agenda item comes up, especially when there's this many people on. It allows all of us to kind of to manage the meeting a little better. And finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. Okay, love doing all that. All right, we'll call to order the Select Board meeting for February 2nd, 2022. It's 5:34. And no changes to the agenda that I know of. Announcements, over to Libby.
Thank you very much. This meeting is being video and audio recorded as noted. We didn't have any other printed announcements on the agenda, but we did have a storm on Saturday. So I invited the police chief, who is also our emergency management director, to give a follow-up report on it. And that will include things like damage to town property, power issues, cleanup. The shelter was activated, and he can speak to how that was utilized. And I also really wanted to thank Public Works. They did a fantastic job. They got out and pre-treated and did a lot of cleanup during and after the storm. They had some help from the sewer department. So thank you very much, David, for lending your staff to that. At risk of forgetting people, the emergency management team, of course, was available at all times to coordinate and communicate. National Grid The chief can speak to this too, but I think they were incredibly responsive in a difficult situation. And the school, of course, got the shelter set up. So thank you very much to them. And I hope to God I didn't forget anybody, but if I did, thank you. Chief?
Good evening. Winter Storm Keenan, which struck on Friday, Saturday for the most part, we started dealing with this storm on Tuesday as we were getting briefings from the National Weather Service about a potential for the winter storm that may hit. All the town departments that deal with different storm mitigation measures, such as DPW, facilities, sewer, started their normal preparations. Sewer department, for instance, started installing generators at pump stations in the event of power outages. DPW started cleaning drains, started putting out barricades, started getting ready to pre-treat streets before the snow and the ice hit. A lot of preparations go into in advance of these storms. A lot of it's probably not noticeable to people because it's just not huge amounts of people around. National Grid pre-deployed some extra crews to Nantucket prior to the storm to deal with repairs to wires and trees going down. Then as we started moving through the week, we started coordinating with MEMA and the Barnstable County Regional Emergency Planning Commission to make sure that the resources were for recovery were pre-placed, pre-staged where they needed to be. As we're moving towards Friday, actually the storm totals that we were hearing earlier in the week started to decrease to the point where it was just starting to look like it was going to be very windy, but just another heavy winter storm. So things kind of moved into the weekend, and then Saturday or Friday night, as we all know, we started getting a lot of rain. And then by the time people started waking up on Saturday morning, there was a lot of sleet and icy snow that had fallen, covered roads, covered vehicles, covered buildings, more importantly, covered trees and covered electrical wires. And throughout the day, the wind that was blowing pretty steady started uprooting trees, breaking limbs because of the heavy ice accumulation. And some wires, main feeder wires, were starting to come down as they were, if you were out and about, which fortunately there weren't a lot of people out and about, you would have noticed a lot of these heavy wires were actually spinning on their poles up there. And as we started experiencing power outages, at one point in time, we were up to about 40% of the island was out of power or had outages. Now, National Grid, you got to remember the same rules that keep the boats from moving across the sound during a windy day are the same rules that apply to electrical crews going up in bucket trucks to repair these things. So National Grid made repairs where it was safe to do repairs to restore power, but they, for the most part, during the heavy part of the storm on Saturday, if they couldn't safely make a repair, they made the downed wires safe. We were experiencing a lot of live electrical wires that were on the ground. And oftentimes those wires get tangled up with cable wires and telephone lines. And even though somebody might think there's a cable wire down, that cable wire 2 blocks down might be wrapped around a live electrical wire that's also down, so it may be hot. So they spent a lot of time responding to calls from the police department addressing to make safe those situations. All in all, they kept the power outages, other than to some of the larger areas that multiple houses would go out. They were able to restore many of the outages within a short period of time, within hours of the reports being made. Where many of the long-term outages occurred, there was either major damage to the wires that were in the area. For instance, Eel Point had a string of utility poles that were knocked down. Nantucket had a tangle of electrical wires and cable wires and everything all messed up that were brought down by some trees and, quite frankly, just the high winds that went through the Eel Point and the Nantucket area. But most of by Monday afternoon, all but I believe 2 of the reported outages had been restored. Now that's an important point to make in a storm. The electric company only knows about outages that somebody tells them about. So, there's if they lose a major feed to some area, that's something that, they can detect. But if you lose power to your house, they don't know that unless somebody reports it. And many of the people that we were getting complaints from that they'd been out of power for an extended period of time, they never reported it to the power company. Once they did, or we made the report for them, then those repairs were generally made fairly quickly after they received it. But sometimes if there was a lot of trees involved, wrapped up, then they had to coordinate not only the repair crew coming, but also a tree removal crew to be on the site as well to help with that. So, it works in kind of a priority situation where they may be ready to go to a home on Vesper Drive, for instance, but all of a sudden the power goes out for a whole area out in Nantucket, then they would divert the crews out to that larger outage because of the extent of it. So all in all, from an emergency management perspective, we believe National Grid was very responsive to our requests. They were they did repairs on things that we didn't think they could do repairs on, quite frankly, in the middle of that winter hurricane. All in all, the damage that was caused was mostly to the electrical system and to some trees. We had some trees knocked down, especially here around the Mid-Island area. I think we lost 3 at the public safety building here. Some of those Leland cypresses just got laid right over onto the ground. Dr. Ruby's office had a fairly large tree that went down in front of his facility. We all know the tree house on India Street that came down. There was some pretty significant wind that did some destruction to trees. We didn't have any damage to any town facilities that we're aware of at this point. Most of the reports are in from the different town departments. The only facility that did suffer any damage, and although it probably looks worse than it actually is, and that's on the town pier. We had 1.5 to 2 foot of storm surge on top of an astronomical high tide out there. I think the water got up to 6.5 foot, and then there was probably 2 and 3 foot waves on top of that caused by that wind pounding on the town pier from the northeast. It broke away 2 large sections, about 20 foot total, out at the end of the pier. It busted away some of the batter boards on the very end of the pier, and then buckled a bunch of the boards along the pier as the waves hit them from below. Most of that stuff can just be refastened. Some of it will have to be rebuilt out on the end, and we will need a contractor such as Mohawk or ADM or one of those group marine building companies to come and deal with the batter boards at the very end because of the size of those boards and the way that they have to be fastened. But we fully expect that the town pier will be repaired and operational come time for this next year or the 2022 boating season. Our biggest risk there at this point is just further damage from any other storms we get. Some of those boards have been knocked loose. If we're not able to secure them, they could be knocked loose further or more could occur. The floating dock was removed. Actually, that piece or section of floating dock that you saw the picture of, many of you, that was damaged, was actually one that was damaged in previous storm, and it was waiting to be repaired. So the the repaired sections and the good sections of the old floating dock were actually safely stored over in the boat basin, where they've been wet stored for most of the winter. So we're repairing, I think there's 9 sections of the floating dock that were damaged in a previous storm that happened a month or so ago, or a couple months ago before we got the town pier out. And but those are being repaired over the winter, and that'll be back in operation again by spring. The remaining cleanup, DPW's removing some piles of snow from different areas that, in preparation for any more snowstorms that we might get, make room. We're reviewing our policy on snow emergency. There was a discussion that was had between DPW and emergency managers about a snow emergency declaration for this, but it was determined that, this really kind of turned around quickly on us. And we thought that we could safely deal with any problems that came up at intersections by coordinating between the DPW and the police department to get cars moved. We didn't believe that a snow emergency declaration or the routes was necessary in this circumstance. And the brunt of, and this was a storm that occurred mostly during daylight hours on a weekend where we had very little traffic downtown. So I think, we are going to look at the snow emergency policy because we did have some questions come up about that. And if there's any revisions that need to be made, we'll come forward to the select board with that request. That's all I have. If you have any questions about the storm.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Libby? Was that it? Announcements
That was it.
on your end? Okay. Anything from the select board? Announcements or comments? Okay, there's no follow-up comments from prior select board meetings. Is there any public comment tonight on items or topics that is not on the agenda tonight? Please raise your digital hand. I see one. Yes. Howard Dickler?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Howard.
Thank you. I could not attend last week's select board meeting, and I would like to make a comment about Article 42, which was discussed at that time. In my view, the newly proposed Article 42 in its current form is a frightening open door to the rampant commercialization of residential housing that will further decimate our year-round housing and destroy what is left of our year-round neighborhoods. Short-term rental of residential properties is a long-standing practice on this island, but a court decision elsewhere in the state has caused leadership to worry about the practice that it might not be legal. Yet there is no way around the fact that such rentals are a business, using properties specifically zoned for residential rather than business use. Every property owner who does such rentals identifies the costs and income as a business on their tax return. So to ensure that such rentals are legal, the town has proposed the current Article 42, which declares it legal by making it an unrestricted right for almost every single piece of residential property on the island. But conferring this as a right would foreclose any possibility of limiting that right and accelerate the decline of year-round housing. Is that what we really want? There is an alternate path. Instead, establish short-term rentals as a non-conforming use for which exemptions can be granted. Then let the community reach a consensus on what the parameters for such exemptions would be. That would give the island control over its destiny. We are at a crossroads. One path leads to more. The other leads to sustainability. This island found a way to protect itself from rampant development and preserve open space. Should we not find a way to protect ourselves from rampant commercialization of year-round housing? At a time when many communities like ours are moving to restrict short-term rentals, do we really want to go in the other direction? It is up to us to decide what kind of an island we wish to be. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Howard. Is any other public comment tonight? It's not on the agenda. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised. We move on to the COVID-19 update from the Public Health Department. We have Roberto Santamaria here.
Good evening.
Hi there.
So since we have a nice long meeting today, I'm going to try to keep this one as long as tedious as possible. So where we really are is in pretty good shape. If you remember the last time I was here, I discussed the fact that we have too small of a population to sustain a prolonged high intensity burn. And what we have really come to see is that that's exactly it. So what you'll see in front of you right now is today's Biobot report. You are seeing the report, right? Not my Word document. Okay. You'll see today's Biobot report, and today it came out to right here. So we saw a very sharp, the highest increase we had ever had, and then an immediate drop off, which is what we were expecting with the Omicron surge. The population that we have can't sustain a huge burn like we were seeing in some of the larger cities. So in comparison to where we were, the hardest and strongest outbreak that we had seen was actually last winter at exactly the same time. And that is the peak where we were at this time last year. We had almost 3 times the amount of cases than we did at this time last year. But because of the high vaccination rate that we have, and because Omicron wasn't hitting as hard to the vaccinated individuals, we, knock on wood, so far have not seen any deaths from this spike. So with that, I think that's everything, yeah. And with that, just because we're at the bottom of this spike here doesn't mean that we won't see another spike. But as we move along, things are getting better. And then we received word today that Pfizer is applying to get emergency use authorization for children below the age of 5 as well. So now we'll be able to start doing vaccinations across the entire age range. And signups for the clinics are Wednesdays today. It's happening right now. And the vaccination clinics are Thursdays from 4 to 6. So at the trailer here at 131 Pleasant Street. And with that, I'll call it a day.
Melissa? Thanks, Roberto.
Thanks so much, Jason, and thanks, Roberto. I've got 2 questions for you. I'll ask them and I'll let you answer them. The first one is just an update on our island home and the cases and how people are recovering there. And then the second question is, there was some discussion at our Board of Health meeting about access to vaccines for the kids 5 to 12, and I'm just wondering how that's going. Thanks so much.
Yes, so as far as OIH goes, thank God, knock on wood, going well. We received a report yesterday that approximately half of all the cases have recovered successfully, which is really good news. We are still seeing the occasional case pop up. We did have 2 positives yesterday, but by and large, the antibody treatments and the vaccines are doing what they're supposed to do. So that's really great news, and we're monitoring that. Same thing, big flash spike of cases, and then you wait it out. So it's going well, and hopefully at this time next week we should see almost every case recovered. As far as vaccination for pediatrics, I know the schools are setting up through the state Department of Public Health a vaccine clinic for youth. They had to reschedule that because of the storm, I believe that is coming up this weekend or next weekend. We can confirm that later and get more information out. As far as the school clinics go, the school has been organizing all of them, and the school is staffing them. We're not staffing the school clinics. We're providing support, but we're not staffing them. We just don't have the staff to do so. So as far as the school clinics for the youth, we don't know where that's how long that's going to be able to go. That all depends on the state on whether or not they're still going to be sending teams over. For us, we are looking still. We don't have the capacity to do pediatrics yet. What's happening is we're still focusing on getting the 12 and older people vaccinated and boosted, because we can crank out 70, 80 in vaccinations in that 1.5 to 2 hours that we get. With pediatrics, they take a significant amount of time, which we'd only be able to get in that 2-hour time frame, about 30 or so. So we're trying to get our most bang for our buck. So we are holding off still on providing pediatric vaccinations at our specific clinics. So I have a meeting tomorrow with the superintendent to talk about the clinic program as it stands at the schools.
Thank you, Roberto. A question on the distribution of home tests for the state and Cape and Islands. How's that going? Because if there is another small surge coming with the breaks and people traveling, it'd be nice to be.
Yes. So we did receive a small shipment of rapid antigen tests that we are distributing to. We gave a few boxes to OIH. We gave some to Homestead. We gave some around as we have it. So we were able to get that through the Island Healthcare from Martha's Vineyard. So they received a pallet for us, and then Cape Air flew it over here to us for free. So we know we owe Cape Air a big debt. They did that to us on their dime, for us on their dime. The Barnstable County order was placed and it is being delivered. Erica Woods from Barnstable County Health Department said it should be delivered by this week, by this Friday. So the only issue would be now the logistics of getting it from Barnstable County to us, which I'm sure we can get it on the High Line through with freight and things like that. It's just, we got to do the actual chain of custody, which might actually mean me having to go over there and actually sign for them. So, but that should be next week. We should be actually taking delivery of a pallet of about 3,000 rapid antigen tests early next week.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from board members? All right.
Just suggestion for Roberto. My guess, I bring a lot of pallets over through Cape Cod Express, and I'm sure they'd be willing to. I'll volunteer for them. I'll either use my my price, or I guarantee we'd bring them over. If you ask them, they could pick them up and bring them right over on the boat.
That'd be perfect. Why don't we connect offline and do some logistics?
I can reach out. I'm sure they'd help.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Roberto. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, there's no new business that I know of. We have a approval of minutes, January 26th, approval of Treasury warrants for February 2nd. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor by roll call, Melissa,
Aye.
Don,
Aye.
and Matt.
Aye.
Jason, aye. That passes 4-0. Approval of pending contracts. Any questions there or a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor, Melissa,
Aye.
Don,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye.
Jason, aye. Thank you all. Consent items, gift acceptance, Our Island Home, and the fire department. I'd like to start just reading these. I think people do such compassion and kindness to give these gifts. I just want to, just a lot of people read these or listen to these meetings on the radio. So there was one gift to Island Home, $1,794 from the Friends of Our Island Home for the purchase of bedside tables. for residents. And then the fire department received 1,000 from the I think it's Sternlick Foundation for training initiatives. So thank you. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the gifts for their designated purposes with thanks to go to the donors.
Thanks, Melissa.
Second.
All those in favor? Melissa?
Aye.
Don?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Jason? Aye. That passes 4-0. Thank you. We now have a public hearing to consider application for change of category from annual wine and malt beverage with cordials restaurant license to annual all alcohol beverage license for the Beat. I think Amy is here to walk us through, and I believe Amy Young from the Beat is also here.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, hey, much better that way. Yes, as you mentioned, this is for the Beat at 9 South Water Street. Excuse me. They are applying for what is known as a change of category, which, as you mentioned, refers to the type of alcohol they are licensed to sell. Just background, they started in 2019 with a wine and malt beverages license. They added cordials in 2021 and now are requesting an upgrade to the all alcohol beverages category. They are a license in very good standing. They've gone up in slow increments here, and they are purely a eat-in facility. We're not talking about live entertainment location or anything of that sort. So they, and I have to commend them for their efforts in being a true annual license and being open as much as possible. So that's a nice addition to downtown. So we again recommend the change and have absolutely no objections to this amendment. And I'll leave it to you, Amy.
Hi, everyone. Is it me? My
Yeah,
turn?
go ahead, Amy. If you want to say anything, please go ahead.
Sure. Well, I have Felino here as well. And we just, have learned a lot over the last few years and know now that our guests and our clientele, are looking for more from us. And we want to be able to accommodate and, offer them what they're asking for. So by adding the all alcohol license, doesn't mean that we're going to add a bar or, be open late nights. It just means that we're expanding our offerings for our guests so we can better service our guests.
Thank you, Amy. This is a public hearing, so we can take any comments from the public. And select board, if you have any questions, you also can ask them to either Amy. Okay, I don't see any questions or comments. I'll just give it another second. Public hearing. Amy Young, I do love that I can see the shelving, the very restaurant shelving. No, I like it. Keep it. No, keep it. You guys are both working. Okay, I guess we will close the public hearing. Any comments or motion from the board?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Thank you. By roll call, Melissa,
Aye.
Dawn,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye.
and Jason, aye. That passes 4-0. Thank you, Felino. Thank you, Amy.
Don't forget the determination.
Oh, thank you. So is that a separate motion or can we add that to the,
Just do another one.
okay.
I can't remember what it is, but I'll make it.
Okay, well, someone like to make a motion request for a determination that the premises license to sell alcohol beverages is not detrimental to the spiritual activities of a church pursuant to section 16C of MGL chapter 138.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor, Melissa,
Aye.
Dawn,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye.
Jason, aye. That also passes 4-0. Okay. Now, thank you, Amy. Thank you, Felino. Thank you, Amy Baxter.
Everyone. Have a great night. Thank you so much.
Thanks. And thank you, Libby, for that reminder. Okay. Town managers report.
First off, we have the fire chief. He's going to review proposed ambulance fee schedule increases. So just he'll review the history of this, but this agenda item is intended to brief you on this and get your concurrence or not to schedule a public hearing for the actual fee increases. So this is more of a briefing and a request to schedule a public hearing. Chief?
Thank you. And Hi, board. Haven't seen you for a while. The ambulance rates I had last time we raised them was about 4 years ago. And it was my intent to come back every 3 years to look at the possible raises in those rates. And last year I didn't feel it was very appropriate during the pandemic to do that. So I'm bringing it to you about a year late to what I promised previously. These changes as to what you can see in front are current and proposed, streamline some of the charges we have where we're removing like oxygen defibrillation is more of an a la carte service than picking and choosing. And then it brings us in line with other towns around the community or around the area on the Vineyard, Sandwich, and New Bedford. So it's these prices, the proposed pricing for service came from Comstar, which is our billing agency, as to what those other charges or other towns reflect. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Jason had to step away for a minute. So are there any questions? Do we just need to schedule the public hearing? Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I think if you guys are okay with, the board is okay with the proposal to increase the fees, or at least schedule a public hearing to increase the fees. If you don't have any questions now, then we will proceed to schedule the public hearing. You don't have to necessarily have a date right now. We'll figure that out.
Okay, do you need a motion or is it just consensus?
I think it's just a consensus. And if you had any questions specifically.
I'm seeing thumbs up from everybody, so.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Next up is licensing administrator review of Nantucket Cottage Hospital's proposed 2022 Boston Pops for Nantucket event scheduled for August 13th, 2022 at Jetty's Beach. Oh, Jason's back.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. In a similar fashion to the last discussion here, this is being provided as an update for the board as to where we are in the planning. Thank you, Erica. And as you know, there's been great discussion over this at the size of the event and managing the event with public safety and town resources. And due to the significant changes in the plan of the POPs as we move forward for 2022, we're providing this update to the select board to include all the public safety and security changes that have been worked through so the hospital can feel secure in moving forward with the planning. I'll go over our recommendation for moving forward here as well, and let the hospital have their moment to discuss these changes. And as we've been working through this the past few months, just to thank with the hospital, Chris Galacki, who is here, and Ashlyn Glynn, as well as Chief Murphy, Chief Pittman, Lieutenant McVicker, and Lieutenant Coakley, myself, and Maria Javosnik in licensing. I've been working through, as I put in this discussion here, all the different areas and topics that we've talked about. I won't get into the weeds here with that. And just quickly, recommendation for this discussion. Like I have here in recommendation, we're just reviewing briefly the history of this event and the background for the changes and update to the plan. We have both chiefs here as well to answer any questions or review any background for these requested changes. For public safety, hospital is here, and in just a moment we'll present the outline that they have put in the packet here for the plan in response to town concerns and direction. After that, we'll just kind of get back, see what the board's thoughts are, identify any areas we might need to address, and talk about next steps, which does include determining further review for a public hearing to issue the final permits. Once we have the final details all together, liabilities, insurance, conditions, those sorts of things, we felt that we wanted to get before you now so that the hospital feels comfortable moving forward. They have a lot of resources to secure and plans to make. So I want them to be able to do that before we issue the final permit and go through all those details as well. So I think I'm going to stop there and allow them to discuss with you the points that they made in the slide here that they provided. Then we'll come back with any questions and discuss next steps.
Well, thank you, Amy. I guess this would be the point, Jason, where I can move forward and,
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead, Garrett.
all right, well, thank you. First, I want to say that the planning that you're going to see reflected in the documents today are through a collaboration that's been extremely strong with the community, with the town, all of the safety officials. It was a opening moment for me, eye-opening, better part of a year ago when we sat down with the town to talk about could we move into doing the POPs last year, and I was given a download of many years of the POPs and where they've been successful and where there's been concerns. So it's been a great opportunity to listen and to learn. It's been a great opportunity to work collaboratively with the community and all of the people involved to put a plan together. And one thing that we wanted to do right away was have an apples to apples discussion. So we did engage a company called the Command Group. They are a former group of secrets. They are a group of Secret Service agents that have left the service and formed their own company to put together plans just like this in communities for protection or for events and so forth. So I believe with that group, we were able to have very salient discussions with all of the police departments, the state police, the fire department, and the town, and so forth. So a lot of good has come out of that. As you all know, the Cottage Hospital for many years has relied on the outcome of the dollars that come from this. We go to the Cottage Hospital to support its operations. We very much appreciate the dollars that come forward to help us deliver services to our community. We're all in need of those dollars, and we use them very wisely. The support of this community has been unbelievable in the off years where we couldn't have a live POPs, but we were able to receive some dollars. So we want to thank the community. But we very much wanted to keep the theme of this event focused on the whole community, that this is a community event, one that is very special for the Cape and Islands, and move it forward if at all possible. So Amy, thank you for shepherding this along. Thank you, Chief Pittman, Murphy, all the others that have been involved with my team. And at this point, I'll just turn this over to Chris Klowacki, who will walk us through the details.
Sure, thanks, Gary. Gary mentioned the Command Group, and a lot of what the changes I'm going to discuss here were proposed either in response to the request from Public Safety on Nantucket, and some of them were just having the opportunity to have the Command Group look at the event and come with their ideas about what can make it a safer and more secure event, which is something we all want. As Amy mentioned, there's tons of weeds here. There's about a 40-page safety and security report currently. That's a living document that'll grow between now and the event as well in partnership with the town. So I'm just going to hit on a couple of the highlights here of the changes. We are proposing a reduction in the total ticketed attendance to 5,500. Which is about 1,000 less than previously permitted, which creates a lot of flexibility in terms of how we handle the crowd and move the crowd and divide the crowd. And the feeling was that would be a more manageable event, both on the location of the event and people getting to and from it. We are going to not allow outside alcohol. Previously, we've asked for a waiver to the open container law as it relates to general admission on the beach. And this year, the feeling was that we shouldn't do that. And so we won't be allowing outside alcohol. And part and parcel of that, and something we would have brought to bear anyway, is we will be doing bag checks at the entrance, both related to that item as well as just safety and security in general. One of the other bigger issues is we won't be putting fireworks on the beaches we have previously. And that does a couple of things for us. One of which you see on the map here, which is it creates an additional emergency exit down along Jetty's Beach on the harbor side down towards Charles Street. We are talking about whether or not fireworks might make sense on a barge west of the West Jetty. And we're working with the chief on that, as well as the fireworks company, to figure out if that's something that is doable and advisable. And a big part of the conversation, as you'll recall from last summer, is just additional resources. So we're in touch with Mass State Police currently. We've got numbers from the chief and from the police department on what they would need in terms of additional state police officers to help with traffic as well as on-site event security. We've been talking to the Troop D commander about that, who's assured us that they can provide those resources to us. It's a big number, but he said it's a number that they're very confident that they can provide. We'll be bringing in quite a bit more additional private security. We already bring in about 50 private security personnel. We're going to increase that number significantly. And a big part of that will be to do those bag checks that I spoke about. And then we're also going to bring in third-party emergency medical service, which is something Chief Murphy and we have been discussing for a while, that allow him more flexibility if they should get a call off-site and need to use the ambulance and the crew. But it'll also allow us to have more emergency medical right there on site. And it's a firm that both the chief and we know very well that we use currently for transport of behavioral health patients off the island. I think those are really the big issues. As I mentioned, there's tons more that ultimately I'm sure you'll all see in the security report. A lot of real thoughtfulness has gone into that. We're doing more detailed work and mapping of on-site exactly where all the vehicles and all the people will be. Additional emergency lighting that'll allow us to light up Bathing Beach Road and the emergency exits, both just at exit time and on in case of emergency, and other detail like that. But I think we've gotten to a place where we still have some details to iron out, but where everyone's pretty pleased about what we're able to put forward, and should be a great event.
Thank you, Chris. Just to remind everyone, there will be a public hearing, down the road where the public will have a chance to ask questions. But this is a really nice update. So I appreciate Gary and Chris coming on. Was there any questions from board members? Melissa?
I didn't have a question, but I just want to thank everyone for their hard work and really, I think, paying attention, working collaboratively and paying attention to the safety concerns that were raised. I think everyone in the community recognizes the value of this event, both to the hospital and your fundraising efforts, but also as just a wonderful community event. And I'm really happy to see some progress made and hope that we can all celebrate it, but feel better about the safety and security of everyone in attendance. So thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Matt?
Yeah, my concern was what changed between last year and this year, staffing wise, but it's not that Chris just answered that you're bringing people in to help do this. So I'm sure that's, makes the difference from the town side. So I'm happy to hear that. So I think it's great.
Thanks, Matt. Anybody else? Don? Okay. Any other last comments? Anything you forgot? Okay. Amy, is that a hand?
Yep, and I was just going to do this last as long as everyone's spoken. Just couple things. Certainly, this is something, and thank you to everyone that's been helpful in response to, the call we had in August regarding large events, and that we're using this and others as well to apply similar reviews to large events. Not just obviously the POPs, it's one of the larger ones, but certainly working through the same types of things to provide the same sense of security and stuff for these events moving forward. So it's a work in progress, and will evolve as we go. And just a comment, as we mentioned, anytime with these events, it's required by bylaw to have a public hearing to issue the permit, especially in this case, since there is significant changes. We're just looking to tighten up the details, administrative things, liability, insurance, conditions, things of that sort. So that's what will be presented, hopefully in the next month or so, when we had that finalized. But like I said, we wanted to get your thoughts and make sure that we can make the hospital and others feel secure to move forward in securing these resources and such, as we take those final steps.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you to everyone who came together in a collaborative mindset to make this happen. So I appreciate that. So I echo what Melissa said.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank
Thanks, Chris.
you.
Bye.
Okay, next up is the Nantucket Warrens Landing Sewer Extension. Libby?
Okay, so first I just want to note that we are not really asking the board tonight for any specific action. We're not asking for a vote or anything like that. This is more of an update and a review of some additional information. I was going to give you a little bit of background on this project, but it does go way back prior to 2016, but I'm just going to start with 2016 because otherwise we could be here for quite a while. So in 2016, this a project to extend sewer to Nantucket and Warrens Landing was brought before a special town meeting. It passed at the special town meeting. However, it failed at the ballot at the subsequent election. Following that, over the next few months after that, the board requested an updated Nantucket water quality study be performed to determine if measures other than sewering the area could be successful to improve and maintain a water quality level that exceeds or meets the total managed daily load, TMDL, of nutrients in the estuaries that are impacted by water quality issues, including Hither Creek, Long Pond, and Nantucket Harbor. And those TMDLs were established by the Department of Environmental Protection. So after the board asked for that, it did take some time, but we finally secured the School of Marine Science Technology, SMAST, at the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth, to undertake additional modeling of various scenarios of sewer, but other measures in addition to sewer. It took some time to procure that study and to have it then prepared. It came out finally at the end of 2019, and it was promptly derailed by the COVID pandemic. We picked it up again in early 2021 with a report completed last summer, and necessitated review by staff and input from some Nantucket representatives. Additionally, since the report was issued, the Coastal Resilience Plan has been issued and endorsed by the board. There are some roadway areas within the route of the proposed sewer that are identified as needing to be raised due to progressive flooding projections. Those cost projections are not included in this report, and they in fact are not projects that need to go together, other than the potential for maybe some cost savings if they're both done at the same time. The sewer project is already being designed with coastal resilient measures, and it isn't reliant upon raising the road. But again, if we're doing the sewer, does it make sense to raise the road? That analysis has not been initiated at this point. So we have a number of people here to present and answer questions about this project. And I think we're going to start with Steve Peterson of Weston and Sampson. Is that right, Steve? Okay.
That is correct, Libby. Thank you very much. And Erica, you're running the PowerPoint here, I believe.
Yes, just tell me what page you want me to start on for you.
So this is fine here. So Libby has brought us through this as far as some background. She did a good job of giving background on the project in terms of the previous planning that was done. So you can go to the next slide. And again, this is what Libby has already spoken to as far as the previous look at this project and votes that were previously taken.
Steve,
it says here, yeah.
I just want to interrupt you for just 1 second.
Absolutely.
I think it's worth mentioning that discussion at the time would indicate a conclusion potentially that the requested amount for this project of $80 million was daunting. And at the time, there wasn't necessarily a great plan for how that amount was going to be assessed other than through the general tax base. But there was obviously a great deal of concern about that number. And that was another reason to re-engage Weston and Sampson to refine the number and review the route in accordance with other conditions that have surfaced or changed since then. Sorry, I just wanted to make note that it was quite a high price tag.
Yeah. No, and exactly. So along those lines, the previous amount that was requested of 80 million didn't only include Nantucket and Warrens, it included Somerset in that vote. And just for some background on that, again, the planning has evolved over time. When the vote was taken in 2016, it was based off of the 2014 CWMP, Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan. And as under that planning document, it was envisioned that the Nantucket area would flow through and discharge into the Somerset area before entering into the existing system. So that was a major reason that Somerset was included at that time. Since the CWMP, we've done the master plan in 2020, and that really focused on the infrastructure and its ability to support all the needs areas that were identified, and really the best way to sewer the different areas. And in the case of Nantucket, it was determined that really the best way, the most cost-effective and most efficient way to sewer Nantucket would be would not require going through the Somerset area, but would connect into the town's existing force main system. So therefore, the need for the Somerset infrastructure to be in place for Nantucket is no longer exists. It's no longer a pressing need. So if you go to the next slide, Erica, our report, that we prepared was strictly focused on Nantucket and Warren's Landing. And as Libby said, it was really, we're still very conceptual as far as the sewer layout, but the intent was to take that conceptual layout, provide a little bit of refinement to it and a little bit more detail so that we could really advance the budgeted cost as you continue to look at the potential of moving forward with sewering that area. And with the previous cost being 5 or 6 years old at this point, and with recent cost data that's been compiled with the recent sewer in the Shimo area and other areas on the island, it was prudent to take a little closer look at that. So still on this slide here, and the way we broke it, the analysis down, is we looked at the collection system as far as how we would collect the areas of Nantucket, and then the actual conveyance system to get it into the existing force main system and the existing sewer system that currently collects at the Surfside wastewater treatment plant. So in this slide here, or this figure that's in the report, you can see the basic boundaries in black of the Nantucket and then the Warren's Landing area. And I know it's a little harder to see, but in the, within those boundaries, there's a network of pipes. And instead of just, single lines, like I said, we refined it a little and kind of built a low pressure system to figure out pipe sizing and where structures would go so that we could do a little bit more detailed cost analysis. And then on the same figure off to the right, that red dot is the proposed pump station. So we're looking to get, and that pump station is sited at the in the vicinity of the DPW landfill for conveying, like I said. And so we'll collect the flow there and then convey it into the existing system. So I think the next slide just provides a little bit more detail on the low pressure sewer network itself. And again, we tried to break it down into some of the unit prices so we could get a better look at what the budgeted cost is for the project. So the layout that we provided ended up being about 49,000 feet of low pressure sewers in the Nantucket area itself. Some of the things that are going to drive the cost and the design are, the roads themselves. There's a lot of public and private roads, similar to what we had in Shimo, as well as a lot of paved and unpaved roads. And you'll hear a recurring theme here: the resurfacing of the roads or the surface restoration is a big cost driver in the project. In terms of the overall area itself, through the master plan, we looked at that stuff, and that's how we really, figured out the flows that were coming from the different areas and how this system would best integrate into the existing infrastructure. We're looking at about 540 current existing lots in the area, and for the purposes of sizing, the pipe network and the total number of pumps and infrastructure required. We used assessors data, GIS data, and current zoning, and we worked with planning, again, as part of the master plan, to project out what we might potentially see in the future. So this, 620 estimated future dwellings, which includes those existing lots and then potential future build out, is what we consider a high end of what this area could ultimately see, and what we would want to at least do our conceptual sewer design based on. So if we can go to the next slide. So in parallel, and Libby hit on this already, in parallel to the concept, the planning that's been going on with the sewers and the concepts that we're looking at, the town is also looking at, coastal resiliency considerations, specifically, coastal erosion due to sea level rise in these areas. In terms of the sewer system itself that we're looking at right now and how we're dealing with the resiliency concept, it's a sealed system, the low pressure sewers. There are no, it's one continuous pipe system that is sealed. We've considered isolation valves. Each property has a valve, but then within the system itself, just because of the coastal erosion concerns, we've in some of the low-lying areas, we're making sure that there's isolation valves so that if certain parts of the system need to be taken out of service, it doesn't impact the overall system as a whole. From the pump station design itself, the biggest thing there was the siting of the pump station. One of the reasons it's out a little bit further away from the heart of the Nantucket area, over by the DPW landfill, is elevation wise. It's out of the highest flood zone, the hurricane inundation zone. So just from an elevation standpoint, trying to keep the pump station itself up and out of the flood elevations. The culverts are something that are being looked at as part of the overall resiliency efforts. From our perspective, and Libby alluded to this, we're looking at it, if these are two separate projects, which we are looking at it that way right now, the sewers can certainly be built in advance of any of the improvements that are ultimately made, just taking into consideration what those future improvements would entail and making sure that, the sewers that are installed will not impact or be impacted by any future improvements of raising the road or potentially replacing the culverts. And I think, Vince, you were going to talk a little bit, I think, here just about those other considerations in terms of the resiliency work that you guys have done to date, these two bullets here.
Correct. Thank you, Steve. So within the Coastal Resilience Plan, Strategy ID 3.1 is a Priority 1 project that is to raise Nantucket Road at 2 locations and potentially also introduce change the culverts to bridges. That would allow for increased flow under the bridges, increased wildlife movement, but also to get the bridge area out of the flood zone and into an elevated position to stop the area from being unusable and make it passable during storms and with sea level rise. It's kind of, there's 2 bullet points on screen, but they're intrinsically linked as two different, to fulfill the same project and the same ideal, and make sure that Nantucket isn't cut off and isolated either through storms or in the future or too distant future through sea level rise.
Thanks, Vince. Just a little background there that I'm sure most of you are already familiar with. And again, as Libby already alluded to, for our purposes, the purposes of our project, these are being looked at as 2 separate projects. And that's something that the town will need to decide down the road. So if you want to go to the next slide, Erica, this is really, again, just some more, summary information on the report that we provided. So I mentioned that we broke it into a collection piece and then a conveyance system. So basically, on the collection system, we talked about the pump station and where it was sited. This just lays out the force main and how we intend or propose to get it into the existing system. And basically, the intent is to connect to the existing force main from the C Street pump station, the actual, basically all along Nantucket Road. So from the red dot down on the left here is that pump station from the previous figure, and then the force main runs all along Nantucket Road and up to the, like I said, the C Street force main up here. Erica, if you can go to the next slide, there's a little bit more just discussion about that. So again, as discussed, pump station site at DPW landfill. So the length of force main along Nantucket Road, it's about 16,500 feet from the proposed site of the pump station to where we would propose to connect to the existing 20-inch DIC street force main at Quaker Road. And the way we looked at this, and again, thinking about, I guess, more redundancy here, and the way we priced it right now. And again, we're trying to make sure our pricing is on the high end of any potential decisions that need to be made, just to make sure we're not shortchanging the number that you're moving forward with. So we looked at this as a dual force main, so two 10-inch force mains from the proposed pump station along that length of Nantucket Road, each one sized to handle the entire amount of the flow, so complete redundancy. And then the next bullet talks about, the intent would be to take one of those, so tie one of those in at the existing 20-inch force main at Quaker Road, and then run an additional 2,100 feet with the other 10-inch force main and connect to the proposed C Street pump station force main number 3 at the intersection of Main Street and Winter Street. And that's the project that is just getting underway now. And I think we're all familiar with why that is in place, or why that's going in place. And, I think that kind of backs up the concept of having the two force mains in the future to make sure you have redundancy. It adds cost to the project, certainly. It's not an insignificant amount. But if you're going to have two force mains, the least expensive way to do it is when you're building the first one, do them at the same time. So that's the way we've looked at it, and again, provides some redundancy and resiliency. So you can go to the next one, Erica. That's that's just a quick background. The report has a little more detail on how we've laid out the system. And again, keeping in mind, this is all still very conceptual. There's been no field work, no survey. We have not started what we would even consider preliminary design. But the next thing was to really get to what the heart of what we were trying to do was provide an updated budgeted cost. So just so you're aware, before we go to the slide that shows the anticipated costs, some of the drivers. I'm sorry, Erica, thank you. The biggest thing to be aware of on this is the linear nature of the project is really what drives the cost. It's not, like we're building one thing on one site. The construction is constantly moving throughout the roads. So the length, size, depth of the pipe obviously drive the cost. That's why we drill down a little bit into the pipe sizing and where the structures are going to go and all of that. The way you procure the grinder pumps, we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide, but that plays into the cost. Things like subsurface conditions, they're fairly consistent on the island, but we would still need to get more data along the corridors or the pipes in terms of what we'll encounter in terms of groundwater and soil conditions. The method of installation, we're assuming right now open cut, which is what's been used on the previous projects. There will certainly be some areas where trenchless technologies can and probably will be used. And one specifically would be in the area of those culverts. And we did cost it that way this time, assuming that, again, coming across those culverts that may be replaced in the future, we would most likely do trenchless to get down well below the existing culverts with the proposed piping through those areas. We'll talk more about surface restoration, and again, you'll see as the costs come forward that's by far the biggest cost driver, and where you install the sewer and how you repair the surface. Public safety, we drew upon our experiences with Shimo in terms of the costs associated with having police details on site, obviously continually protecting the public. I guess that's enough on this slide, Eric. If you want to go to the next slide, we start breaking it down. So here's, I guess, the big reveal. So based on the cost estimate or the budget cost that we put together, the construction cost right now is estimated at $33 million. And you can see that in a lot more detail in the report. The table at the end really breaks down all the quantities that are assumed at this point. And again, one of the big factors and reasons to be doing this at this time is, we have, recent bid data for projects on the island, the SHMO and the SHMO project, and then the Surfside improvements that are being done now. Because understanding the island factor, as we sometimes call it, is important. There's a different cost for these contractors to do the work, get their materials and equipment over to the island versus doing it off island. So having some actual recent on-island data was very helpful. Considering we're still in a conceptual stage, we've left the contingency at 20%. Contingency will drop. That percentage comes down the further along you get with design, the further refined you get. So that's still what we consider a high-end contingency number to make sure that we're covered. Things like engineering, land, and legal costs need to be considered. We talked about public safety. Again, we used SHMO to give us a baseline on what it would likely take out here in terms of police. So the grinder pumps, I wanted to highlight on this one. So the way we price this is assuming that the same policy that was established for the SHMO project would be followed here, where the town provided the pumps to the residents at a discounted price. Basically, under a separate procurement, the town went, put bids out for the procurement of the pumps, and then as the residents tie in, they buy them off of the town for a certain rate. So there's a little bit of a discount there. And again, that policy seems to have worked. So we assume the town would move forward with that, but that's something that will need to be vetted. So that's what brings us to the total of 52 million as the total estimated cost at this point for Nantucket and Warrants land. If you go to the next slide, this is where I kind of wanted to highlight how the paving is really driving it. So if you look at just the breakdown of the 33 million before you start talking about all the auxiliary costs that come with it, really the collection system and the conveyance system together are about half of the cost when you break down the estimate that we put together. And then the surface restoration, primarily the paving, is about half of it. It's about 16 million. And that's not uncommon. I mean, these linear projects become road projects. It become, road restoration. So just so you know, the reason that, that price there assumes that we're going down the middle of every road and resurfacing of the ones that are paved. We're redoing the pavement curb to curb and coming out of it with a new road, which is what we did in most of the roads in the previous area. Roads that are not previously paved are assumed to remain unpaved. But there will be some opportunity on this job, primarily in the force main route along Nantucket, to not be in the road, to be able to utilize the shoulder and even, potentially provide some opportunity to make improvements to the bike path along Nantucket if we choose to put the force main down there. And that would most definitely bring this cost down if we're not talking about resurfacing all of the roads. But again, that's we want it to be on that high end of what you will encounter if if all the decisions end up on the high end. So that's kind of how the costs break down as we've laid out in our report. And Eric, you can go to the next slide. So just general, what are the next steps? Obviously, the town has been looking at this for some time. At some point, on your time frame, you're going to need to decide if you're going to move forward with this, because the next thing on the sewer end would be the authorization of actual design monies, so you can really get into a finer design, the actual permitting, and with that will come refined construction costs, funding applications, public outreach, all of those things, again, to bring this conceptual design to a real design. And ultimately, you'll be looking to authorize construction funds if the project moves forward. So that's kind of hopefully a quick summary of our report. I think that was the last slide, right, Erica? The next one is questions and discussion.
Thank you, Steve.
Any questions from the board? I think a couple people reached out to me through email, said they were going to speak on this. Any board members? Matt?
Yeah, just a couple things. When you say there's 620 more dwellings, is that total or is that over 20 years? Is that a total number for dwellings, or is that?
That's what we right now envision is the total potential build out in the area.
Okay.
So that's not additional to what's there now. That's the final number from the 540 that are there now to 620.
Right. Another question, when you're looking at coastal resiliency, I understand system wise, if you have shut off valves and, et cetera, that makes sense. How, from a placement, are there areas that you would recommend not sewering because you're not going over the bridge, you're not going over the bridge, but are there other areas that are in storm tide pathways or that are in low lying areas that it's sort of, they're going to be, are going to be threatened that you wouldn't recommend we do this?
Yeah, absolutely. As you get into actual final design, the designer would need to work with the town on what really makes sense. Which of these areas are in imminent danger, and it just, quite frankly, don't need to bear the expense for the infrastructure.
Right, because it'll be interesting to see if any of the neighbors, Nantucket neighbors, talk to us tonight, because one of the concerns I think will be, I've been at this a while, is they've all spent 40, 50, 60,000 on IA systems, and we're going to turn around and, if we're going to require them to attach to this, based on 1,100 dwellings, we're talking $44,000 a dwelling for this, based on your rough numbers. How much are they going to pay? How much are we going to, how much is going to go on the sewer rate payers? All that stuff has to be worked out. And so we may get some pushback saying, why did we just spend 50 grand and now we're going to have to attach? And then the question, this is not necessarily for you guys, but for us, from a policy standpoint, should we be thinking, part of going to Nantucket was to pick up Somerset. There are needs areas, there's wetlands and needs areas in Somerset. There's a lot more density in Somerset. So the question is, if we were going to put something forward as a community, do we put forward that area first and then this second? That is a discussion for another night, but I think we should be thinking about that. And that's all I have for now.
Thanks, Matt. Steve, or did anybody want to comment on that? You don't have to, but just give you opportunity. Or Libby, or David.
We have talked extensively about Somerset. Steve, I think you could probably summarize it, or anybody else on the team.
I think it does come down to, what the town, views as the most critical need area. So from our perspective, you don't need the Somerset infrastructure for Nantucket, the way it lays out now. And we know you've been looking at Nantucket for some time. You've been looking at all these areas, but there are certainly reports that bear out that the nitrogen from the septic systems is an issue in the Nantucket area. So we assume that's why it's in the forefront of discussions right now. But there are obviously other needs areas, and it's a matter of prioritizing which ones need to be done first.
Steve, I have a follow-up on that. You said Somerset infrastructure, is it needed for Nantucket, but does it switch around? Like, do you need Nantucket to do Somerset, or can they both be independently designed?
Yep, those are independent
Okay.
right now. The way Nantucket lays out, it's completely independent of any of the other needs areas that haven't been built yet. It takes self-contained and then connects to the existing infrastructure that's already in place.
Thank you.
Hey, Steve, can I just add something for you, Jason?
Sure.
Just so you know, This is Dan, sorry, with Weston and Sampson. Somerset is required for both Hummock North and Hummock South in these areas. Both of those areas, in order to be built, would have to flow through Somerset. So just so you're clear on that one.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yep.
Any other questions from the board before we go to the public? Okay, we go to Bill Greeter. He has his hand up.
Thank you, Jason. Good evening. The Nantucket Conservation Association members, including year-round residents, seasonal residents, and interval ownership owners, we make an effort to become familiar with topics that affect the island, and especially the West End. The last few years, water quality, the future of the landfill, PFAS, coastal erosion, and the possible sewer extension have certainly been at the forefront of studies by the town and other agencies. As we follow the most recent findings of the town finance research, it would seem prudent that we overlay the impact of the coastal erosion report, the sea level rise, on the proposed Nantucket sewer district area. Before the possibility of the town spending upwards of $50 million on a sewer expansion plan into an area predicted to have severe alterations due to coastal erosion, we believe the feasibility of such expansion really needs to be incorporated into the resiliency plan. We also know living on Nantucket is never dull. A recent experience with several power outages this month, especially the blizzard, identified a concern not previously discussed about a low pressure sewer system. We believe every homeowner is going to have a grinder pump, and those eliminate any sort of holding tank. How long can a household go using their toilet facilities without the grinder pump in operation due to no electricity? What is the backup plan for such a failure like we've had the last several days? Will every homeowner be told they need to add a generator to their sewer conversion? Should the proposed sewer district footprint be modified to reflect the predicted livable footprint of the future Nantucket? While this coastal resiliency / sewer plan is reviewed some more, we encourage additional workshops regarding the design and implementation of any such sewer extension to better inform the affected residents on the total impact to their property and their pocketbook. Certainly $52 million is obviously lower than $80 million, but it's still a huge number. And while I understand the discussion between the coastal erosion plan and the sewer extension plan are separate projects, it's all going to hit one collective pocketbook. And as we find every day, we're getting more and more items that are going to cause us to expend money for projects that just pop up, such as the downtown pier project that all of a sudden is going to have another huge amount of money. So it's nice that we get stuff done, but we certainly, in our view, need to step back, reprioritize stuff, and in the interim, have some workshops that folks can attend and not just try to view and catch up at a presentation to the select board. So I thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing how this lays out.
Thank you, Bill. Any other comments or questions from board members? Staff want to add anything? Melissa?
Sorry, computer froze up on me. I guess I would just be curious, what are the next steps from here? I know tonight's a presentation for discussion, but where does this go from here?
I think what we would want to know from the board is there additional information that you need? Are there additional things you'd want us to look at? Do you want us to hold workshops with people and get their input? That was a good idea from Mr. Greeter. How do you all see this proceeding? Do you want us to look at some kind of combination of the coastal resiliency priorities and the coastal resiliency plan along with this project? Again, if we think 52 million is a good number, wait till we add the coastal resiliency measures.
Melissa, then
Yeah,
Don.
I guess just as a follow-up on that thought, I do think the idea of holding some workshops would be great. I like the idea. And, I'm not 100% familiar on how all of this was developed in terms of our priorities of, these needs areas. I'm curious, is this still the top priority? I thought Matt had a great point about Somerset area. So I think that, but I think taking this concept out, aligning it with coastal resiliency planning and bringing it to the public for some conversation, some feedback is going to give us a lot of really important information.
The priority issue is probably one that you all might want to think about as well. This project came up because of water quality in Nantucket. And that was a significant issue when this was raised.
Okay, thanks, Libby.
Don?
I agree that I think that we should move forward with some workshops. And I mean, I do think that the water quality in Nantucket is still a pretty big priority, but I want to make sure that everything's well vetted before we put something with this kind of a dollar figure forward.
Thank you, Don. Matt?
When we talk about water quality, one of the things I would like us to sort of drill down on is, if we sewer, but then we build twice as many dwellings and 3 times as much ground cover, have we actually improved the water quality, or are we actually going to make it worse because we've got more runoff from cars and more things out there? And so that I always ask that question, and I don't really get an answer. So in this case, I think it would be smart for us to understand what that impact will be. There's other pollutants that are impacting the harbor in Nantucket or the harbor, downtown, more than just nitrogen. There's surfactants, there's other pollutants. We're learning about PFAS, but there's other things that are very detrimental to both harbors that aren't necessarily just nitrogen related. And so we have, that has to really be, kind of understood. And I think since these are two different, I think the idea of workshops is great. I'm all for that. Nantucket is probably one of the most organized neighborhoods, and they would give us a lot of feedback. They'll give us more feedback than we want, knowing how they operate. No offense, Nantucket, but I know how you guys are, and you're not shy about giving us, your opinions. And so I think that, workshops would be great in that regard. And then we as a with David Gray, and we should be thinking, what's the biggest bang for our buck? Are we better off to do another area, bring another area forth for 30 million or something and get that done and hold this for 4 or 5 years till we work out the coastal resiliency stuff, and we're going to do zoning changes based on coastal resiliency. That hasn't even been begun yet. And so how, we don't want to, in some ways, we have to be careful not to jump the gun with some of these things. So anyway, those are my thoughts for now.
Thank you, Matt. I think I like the idea of kind of looking at whether it's Somerset and prioritizing those. I don't know if it's doubling the amount of dwellings or whatever you said, Matt, but just understanding what that, I think there's been projections made on that. I think the zoning's been, I wouldn't say fixed, but changed in Nantucket, Somerset. So I would like to, I think it'd be interesting to see all of that, whether that's through a workshop or to help us prioritize. because you're right, Libby, that 50 million is probably going to be, I don't know, doubled, close to 100 with coastal resiliency for building bridges and things like that.
There is a zoning build out analysis in the sewer master plan, and we could certainly, it's available online. We brought it before you before, but we can certainly
Great.
bring it forward at workshops.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Matt.
My understanding is the Nantucket Homeowners Association, they're doing one as well. And theirs is going to have graphics and, you know, and be pretty. So they're going to have an updated one as well, which I think would be helpful and informative for us. Where I got the double the number of dwellings, Jason, is there's 540 now, and they projected 620. And so, you know, so it's an issue. That's the projection that was in our packet was 620 additional. Now, maybe not all of them are going to be built.
I think
it's 80 additional.
80 additional.
What's that?
It's
Oh,
80
I thought-
additional.
Oh, I got, so I, all right, I never mind, 80 more. So
I'm
then
sorry, I didn't explain that well enough.
Yeah, all right, then I read it wrong too.
Yeah, that's what I thought at first as well. But yeah, 80.
Jason, if I could.
Yeah, David, go ahead.
We worked very closely with Andrew Voss on this, and we actually went lot by lot through the entire project. So these numbers are probably the most accurate that we could come up with all the work that we did with Andrew and some of his team.
Thank you, David. While we're waiting for any other comments, we'll go to the attendees. Rick Atherton has his hand up.
Jason, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I really am just following up on some of the brief conversations you just had about density. And I think we would all benefit from a sort of an accurate drill down into the assumptions used in the report from, I won't have these numbers correct, from 540 to 620 or whatever it was, Jason, and which types of lots were impacted by that. In other words, are they unoccupied today? Are they sizable enough to have secondary dwellings? Are they authorized to have tertiary? How would that be impacted by the current proposal to allow short-term rentals on all lots in Nantucket, if at all? And I think the question for the Nantucket people, perhaps more than the rest of us, is the outlook of those kinds of computations and decisions beneficial to the character of Nantucket, or are there zoning changes that can be made right now to protect their current density levels? So those are my questions for you. And I hope the workshops you're talking about help to develop those. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Any other comments or questions? We have a really experienced group of people here with Vince and Jeff and Weston Sampson and Dave and Andrew. Brian Turbot. Vince?
Minor comment. I've been reminded by Holly that this also fits in with HMP recommendations for the sewer, for the raising of the bridge and raising of the road and converting to bridges. It's HMP recommendations F14 and F15.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks for that, Vince. And I guess that does lead it to another question, and this may be answered down the line, but would the implementation of a sewer line give us an opportunity to do some of the coastal resiliency road work that we might be discussing? Is there any alignment in any of those projects?
Well, yeah, that I probably didn't say it right. That's what I was sort of getting at the beginning here of this. And they certainly could be done together, I think, but we haven't really analyzed if there would be what the cost of raising the road would be and the culvert improvements and if it makes sense to do them at the same time. That analysis needs to be undertaken.
Okay, you probably said it right and I just didn't listen correctly. Thanks, Lily.
Andrew?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to respond a little bit to that last comment. Number one, the short-term rental, there's existing short-term rentals in Nantucket right now. According to at least the state list, there's about 148 of those out of the about 700 structures now is what we have in our data. And this constant saying that the zoning is going to allow them everywhere and all this is really misstating the articles that were submitted. And I think, there's a public hearing coming up where some of this will be discussed in further detail. And I would just hope that, some of those statements are misleading and wrong. And I think that, people should get some more information about how, in fact, the zoning and the regulations would be tied together. So on that topic, I just want to enter that into the record. And furthermore, Nantucket has an area plan process that they're working on. And some of the zoning, we've done an overlay of the existing zoning with the coastal resiliency boundaries. And, again, it's a misstatement to say that tertiary dwellings are not allowed in the village residential district, which makes up the majority of the area. And I think, as Libby can attest, we spent quite a lot of time, and it's reflected in this chart, looking at all of the properties out there. So I think people should spend some time digging into this information that's in your packet. And if they have any questions, certainly be happy to respond. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Any other comments from the board? Libby, do you need any more direction or any questions from you?
I have some vague formulation of thoughts as to how to get at some of this. So I think our team needs to get back together and we can talk a bit about how to tackle some workshops and get out maybe some additional information on the build out analysis, as Andrew mentioned. And Dan, I think maybe you worked on this too. It was lot by lot with no lot was skipped over and it was analyzed in extreme detail. That is how that number was so specific. But that certainly it's a concern for people, obviously. So it's something we could work on addressing. And I guess, ultimately we need to determine what is the priority to be based on. Is water quality higher than coastal resiliency? I don't really know how to get at what Matt was saying about vehicle runoff and all that sort of thing as a result of storing Nantucket. I'm not really sure how we would capture that, but we can discuss that at length in our.
Because I can try to paraphrase Matt, at least the way I thought what you meant, Matt, was just trying to compare. If we're going to do sewer on Nantucket, it's going to improve water quality. But if it adds another 80, 100, 150 more homes, what effect is that on the environment as well? You can kind of, were we gaining a little bit? Was that what you meant, Matt?
Yeah, that is, it's a question I've asked, especially around the ponds when we've talked about, we sewer, and then all of a sudden we've got a lot more build out around these ponds, and all that stuff is flowing into the ponds. It's not just, so we've taken out the nitrogen, but what else have we added that's now inputs? All in more homes, more fertilizer, more driveways and cars and hardscaping, and it's and to be honest, it's a question I've asked the land council, and they haven't, they agree with me, but haven't got their head around it either. But it comes from about 20 years ago. When we were talking about the scallops and what correlates to the loss of scalloping. One of the questions I had with the consultants back then was what correlates with the loss of scalloping, and they said the only thing that fully correlates is, because most of these things are only giving part of the influence. They don't do all of it. You can't tell exactly. But they said the only thing that really correlates was build out and the number of people. When you get to a certain amount of people, in a certain area, you're pretty much the scallops are gone. Now, that was their experience on Long Island and on the Cape. And so I've always sort of thought about that, from a couple different angles. Sometimes I think we think that nitrogen alone is going to take care of it. And I think there are other inputs that we need to be, cognizant of. That's all.
Thanks, Matt. Melissa?
Thanks. And I think, just to, I guess, maybe add a little bit to the conversation around prioritization of, which objective is maybe the top priority. I think we're really discovering that, there's a lot of competing priorities, and one's not necessarily more important than the other when you talk about coastal resiliency and development, water quality. So looking for solutions that are going to give us, the best of all three, or, I think we're going to have some non-isolated policy conversations and really look at that bigger picture of, what can we design that's going to meet several objectives to the best of our ability. So I think that this is a really great presentation. I thank you all for your hard work on this and for taking the time to really look at those answers discover those answers on, how much more we would be building out, for example, that lot by lot examination. And I think we need to start to get some community feedback on what's possible here. So I thank you. This is a really great conversation.
Thanks, Melissa. Libby, are you good?
I think so. It's going to take us a little while to reconvene and get at some of this stuff and figure out how to design some community feedback workshops. So stay tuned, but it isn't going to be tomorrow.
Thank you. Any last comments? Okay. Thanks, everyone. It was a good discussion. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody from Weston Sampson. Came on, all the staff.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, select board reports and comments. Any committee reports before we get to the HCC appeal? All right, and I'm seeing none. We'll move over to the public hearing to consider appeal of Jeff Gardner, the Historical District Commission approval of a certificate of appropriateness for a structure located at 8 Bank Street. Before we get started, Erica, could you put up the HCC appeal process just so all board members and everybody can just remember? If you can. Okay, so we'll open the public hearing and then we will go to, we're outlining the procedures. Appellant will state their reason for the appeal. We'll go to the HDC. Usually we go back and forth a couple times, and then once I start hearing kind of repetitive comments, I'll try to stop that, go to public comment. If the same thing, once the public comment start getting repetitive, I'll try to ask everybody to wrap up so we can, sometimes we have to go back again to the HDC and the appellant after public comment. And then we'll, at that point, we'll close the public hearing, and then the board members will discuss and then make a decision. So I just wanted to go over that for everyone, with everyone really quick. Okay. So who is representing the appellant today? John, you're muted, I think, Jonathan.
I'm sorry. I represent appellants Jeff Gardner as manager of 9 Broadway LLC, Joseph and Kathy Arve, Sherry Kelly and Mary Williams. Co-counsel Margaret Van Duzen is an appellant and represents the other appellants, Ann Riley and Isabel Lanzert, as trustees of the Van Dusen Realty Trust, Helen Strong, Samuel Daniel, and Janet Baloo.
Okay. Thank you. Would you guys like to start?
Yes, please. I will go first.
Thank you.
This is an appeal of the certificate of appropriateness issued by the HDC, which effectively allows the destruction of an historic structure and the construction of a new dwelling at 8 Bank Street in Wisconsin. The certificate of appropriateness is shown as dated September 7, 2021. This appeal is timely under Section 11 of the Act because it is filed within 10 days of December 9, 2021, the date of notice to the appellants that the certificate of appropriateness had supposedly issued. The official records of the Historic District Commission indicate that the members of the commission did not intend to approve a certificate of appropriateness at the September 7 hearing. If I may share the minutes of the September 7 meeting. Those voting at the meeting were the acting chair, Ms. Coombs, McLaughlin, Camp, and Thornwell. If you go down to the bottom of this, you'll see that the motion was made to approve by Mr. McLaughlin. It was not carried 2-2 with Coombs and Camp abstaining. There was then a motion to hold for revisions, which carried 4-0. So that is the official record of the Historic District Commission. There were no further committee minutes regarding 8 Bank Street, this project. There was no notice of a further vote of the commission. Appellants are entitled to rely on the HDC's approved minutes. They have not waived their appellate rights. There's good cause for the board to permit the appeal of the certificate of appropriateness. There are other irregularities with respect to the certificate of appropriateness I'd like to mention. First, it approves work requested in the application filed in April 2021. However, there were changes made subsequent to the initial application, not reflected in the certificate of appropriateness. Second, the certificate of appropriateness effectively permits the demolition or raising of the structure at 8 Bank Street without a finding under the Act that demolition should be permitted. I will briefly address the issue of standing. The appellants are all persons aggrieved and have standing under Section 11 of the Act to bring this appeal of the certificate of appropriateness. The Act protects the visual interests that are connected with preserving the historic integrity of the village of Wisconsin. As in the case of Montgomery versus the Board of Selectmen of Nantucket, the appellants sufficiently demonstrate that this demolition and reconstruction of 8 Bank Street would have a substantial negative effect on the historic character of their neighborhood's streetscape and their enjoyment of it. We have submitted as Exhibit A to our appeal a letter dated September 9, 2021 from appellant Jeff Gardner and Ann Gardner regarding the negative effect of the project, and also cataloging comments of 22 voices in opposition. We request that the board vacate the certificate of appropriateness and remand the matter to the HDC for further hearing. I would now ask my co-counsel, Margaret Van Duzen, to speak further on the merits of the appeal.
Yeah, Jonathan, that's fine. Margaret, go ahead. I'm just going to try to keep these to 5 minutes so we can allow more time for kind of rebuttal back and forth. If that's okay. Go ahead.
Good evening. Our house is at 7 Front Street, which maybe you know as Eastward Look. It's the first house on the east side of Front Street. And it's located between the steps that go down to Codfish Park and Middle Gully. And our small cottage was built by our great-grandmother around the same time as the current 8 Bank Street structure. With your permission, I'd just like to share my screen and just pull up a couple of slides that I think will kind of shortcut everyone into the relationship between Front Street, Middle Gully, and 8 Bank Street, which sits at the entrance to Codfish Park. So hopefully this will work. I thought I'd start with a picture of a Model T. And this is Beach Street with Front Street up in the background here. And over on the side is the, at least the original in the early 1900s, 8 Bank Street. And you can see Middle Gully as it goes up behind that and curves around into Front Street. This photograph is taken in the 1920s. Here is 8 Bank Street, and with the view from above on the bank. It's a postcard, actually. So you can see Eastward Look is up here. This is Beach Street in here. Here's Little 8 Bank Street, and here is Middle Gully Road. And I'd just like to say, I do think this is the same post that exists today when you look down. This is Miss Aries. I don't think it was a restaurant, really, but it served hot dogs, cookies, soft drinks, and candy. It is the structure that exists today at 8 Bank Street, and certainly many Sconseters fondly remember going to Miss Aries to buy things, and this is what was converted to a house. The original structure, however, on the property in the 1890s was this particular structure, which you can see again is up against the bank there. And just to prove they had some leisure in those days, here are these fellows out in front of 8 Bank Street. And this particular picture is showing Middle Gully Road in probably the 1870s or the 1890s. I think it's an unclear date on this, but here's one of the fishermen from below in Codfish Park. And Codfish Park grew out of fishermen moving down below the bank and squatting and building on the sand below the bank, because the water used to come up to the bank historically. These little cottages, and then they would do their fishing and dry in the Atlantic, and then do their drying down by these shacks. And over time, the houses became, as hotels were built up on the bluff, they became help cottages. And there certainly was an important community of African Americans, Cape Verdeans, and others that lived below the bank. And then over time, some of those houses were converted to small summer cottages as well. They call this Old Gully Road, and this is actually a postcard from the 1930s, but you can see the connection going up the gully to Front Street, and this is actually Liberty Hall on Front Street. This is a view from the 1990s, and it is from, you can see the cobblestones here that actually go down, and this is the rooftop of 8 Bank Street as it exists today. And I just included this slide because I think it gives you a picture of, as you come down Front Street, how it makes this turn and connects down to Codfish Park. This is a Marshall
Margaret,
Park.
can I stop you there for a second? I think I'm seeing some pictures that aren't in the packet or submitted to the HDC, which we can't view, but I can't remember which ones aren't. So I just want to be careful there. And the 5 minutes is up. If you could wrap it up. I want to remind everybody that we're concentrating on the HDC process and their decision making, if it's arbitrary or capricious. Although I do find this really interesting personally.
Okay, well, I'm really done with the slide. So if you just give me a few moments to make some further comments, that 8 Bank is really an important part of the historical context and the streetscape of Codfish Park. As you can see, it's in a tiny lot. It's 0.03 acres. Right against the bank. And according to Ms. Backus, it is a historic house dating somewhere between 1923 and 1926. It's listed as a contributing element on the National Historic Landmark list of structures. And what is being proposed here is really a new, profoundly vertical 3-bedroom house with a 2nd story, a large dormer, and multiple windows overlooking Middle Gully. It would more than double the height of the existing building, which is 9 feet tall, and go up to 20 feet, overtopping the bank and Front Street. And many people who had an opportunity to look at the height poles in June that were put up at the request of the HDC were taken aback by this. No other house has been allowed this close to the bank. And while other houses in Codfish Park may be higher, it's not really relevant to this discussion because this house is at a higher ground elevation because it's next to the bank and it's near perspective against the bank. So it would be character changing and it would impact the historic streetscape, fundamentally changing Front Street, Middle Gully, and the entrance to Codfish Park forever. The public views that are seen from Front Street over the rooftop of the existing 8 Bank Street and the water views as one walks down Middle Gully will be eliminated if this house is allowed to be built. And it will be visible from 3 directions on, I think, Front Street, which we all would agree is an iconic and much admired island resource for everyone. It will effectively create a wall on Middle Gully. This cobblestone byway is well traveled today as it was by the cod fishermen before.
Margaret, I apologize. I got to ask you to wrap up.
I'm ready to wrap up. Thank you. And so we think that the HDC really didn't give adequate consideration to the streetscape and the public view sheds that will be eliminated and rather just concentrated on the building itself and its design. Thank you.
Thank you. If the panelists are okay, we could go to the HDC. Ray, were you going to be talking, or Holly?
I'm trying to get my video on, not that that matters. This is Ray Pohl, by the way.
That's okay.
So here we go. So I see Abby in the queue. I see a few of the staff in the queue. So I don't know who's going to say what, honestly. And full disclosure, I was not sitting on this application. It was a 4-person board. Abby Camp was chairing. And I'm going to try and get the whole crux of this thing as condensed down as I possibly can. And I think that the way to do that is if somebody, whoever is controlling the screen, could bring up the minutes of the final meeting where the vote was taken. And I want to explain something. And I think that you'll probably want to talk to town council about the legalities of what I'm about to say. But would it be possible to get the minutes up on the screen?
Yeah, Erica, can you do that?
Okay. So here's my question is when Jonathan described the taking of the vote, okay, I don't see it underscored here, but
Can you zoom in just a little more, Erica?
yeah, that would be great. Thank you. So there was obviously the first vote, motion to approve by McLaughlin. Okay, it's right to the right of the word motion. It says motion to approve McLaughlin, not carried 2-2. So the fact is that those two members being Carrie Thornwell and John McLaughlin, who made the motion, voted in favor of the application, and Diane Coombs and Abby Camp abstained. Now, according to our rules, we need to have a quorum to be able to vote through a project. We need to have a quorum just to sit on a project, or we can't hear it at all. And a quorum for the HCC is 3 members. Now, in order to prevail on a vote, you need to get a majority of the quorum sitting. So if the majority is 5 people, if you have 5 people sitting, 3 people need to vote in favor. If 3 people are sitting, 2 people need to vote in favor. Now, we have sort of a strange in-between case where we have not 3 members, we have 4. But the two members that voted in favor are pretty clear. So each vote in favor of registers as 1 positive vote. A vote against the project, and I want to make sure that everybody appreciates the distinction between against the project and abstention. Against the project is a negative vote. An abstention is a 0. So if you have 4 people and 2 people vote in favor of, it's a quorum. If 2 of the people or even 1 of the people abstains, because you have 2 people in favor and less than 2 people against. So if this had run in a different way, by the way, I have absolutely no skin in this game. You know, whatever you guys decide is fine with me. I didn't sit on the application, and I'm just kind of telling you where I think the crux of the problem lies. And I think it lies with how people are interpreting whether this vote, as it says here, interestingly, it said it did not carry, but in point of fact, it did carry. So I don't know who it was that made the determination that the vote did not carry, because it did carry. And so what I'm saying is what I know from having been on the board for 8 years, but I think that town council can corroborate what I just said with regard to the vote. And that's pretty much all I have to say, but thank you very much.
Okay. Mr. Pucci from KP Law, could you comment on what was just discussed?
Sure. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. This is George Pucci from KP Law. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, I think, Eric, I think you can take it down for now, unless you need it up, George.
I do not, thanks. You know, on that issue, the issue of the vote really goes more to the timeliness argument that the appellant has asserted about the timeliness of their appeal. John Giorgio from KP Law had given an opinion following that hearing in question to Leslie Snell. And Ray essentially has it right about what happened. And as it got reflected in the minutes, John gave a different opinion after that. First of all, you had a quorum of 4. It was a 5-member board, and you had 4. So that constituted a quorum, so you could go forward with the hearing. And then what happened was 2 voted in favor, 2 abstained. And John gave a legal opinion to Leslie that was then forwarded to the board in connection with this appeal. And I presume it was also provided as a public record to both the appellant and the permit holder. And John's opinion was that essentially the 2 abstention votes were a nullity, and it was approved by those present and voting. So the only members who counted as present and voting, once you had the quorum, were the two members who actually voted in favor of the application. And then those abstentions didn't count as anything. So you had should have been reflected as a approval by those present and voting. That's John's opinion. It speaks for itself. It's in a written format. And again, regardless of the issue, it really doesn't go to the substance of whether or not a certificate of appropriateness should have issued for this application. I'm happy, or I'm neutral on whether to be contradicted by the certificate holders or their counsel on the timeliness argument. But frankly, in my opinion, the timeliness argument that the appellant presented, and again, nothing to do with the substance of the substantive issues before you, but I think they make a reasonable argument about the timeliness of the appeal, that they had noticed that there was a vote that did not carry to approve it as reflected in the minutes. And then they found out later at a ZBA meeting that it had been treated as approved. And again, nobody did anything nefarious. It was just that legal opinion. John was requested to opine on that well after that hearing had taken place. So the appellant did file the appeal within 10 days of their alleged notice of the approval. So, in my opinion, there's a reasonable chance that a court would rule that their appeal is timely. So that's my opinion on that issue. And again, it's pursuant to what actually happened here in terms of, so if you can, and you're still free to, decide that issue one way or another as a result of this hearing. But assuming you consider the appeal timely, then you have to go forward and, consider the substantive merits of the appeal. And, I'm sure the permit holder wants to talk to that, and probably HDC wants to talk to that as well.
Okay, so I feel like I understand about the 2-2 said not carried, but it did carry. Mr. Giorgio put that in there. I think we understand that. Mr. Pucci, you're saying that the appeal was timely. Everything's fine there.
Jason, I'm just saying it. There's no rule from on high that this is timely, but I think the argument is reasonable that they were following the process closely. Obviously, they were led to believe, according to them, and I'm not advocating their case. I'm just saying, when you look at the record, the minutes did not reflect what John Giorgio's opinion subsequently was, and they allegedly filed this appeal once, within the 10 days of when they actually had notice that this application had been approved, versus a motion to approve did not carry, and there were going to be further hearings for modifications. So what I'm saying is, I think it's a reasonable argument that they presented that, would have a reasonable chance of being accepted by the court as timely.
Okay. Any questions on that? Matt, I saw you had your hand up really quick. Just want to give the board a chance to ask some questions. And Jonathan, I see your hand up. I'll get to you in a second.
Okay, thank you.
No, I had it up. I mean, I can wait, or, my questions really is, what was the intent of the HDC that day? And I'm surprised with 2 abstaining that they could even vote. 2 people on our board abstained, and Jason and I weren't even allowed to discuss a topic. So, we've had experience with that recently. So I do want to make sure that, I want to see what the intent with the HDC vote was when we get into that part. So no, I don't need to talk about that anymore.
Okay, I think our situation was different, but Erica, then
I'm just going to clarify that 2 members of your board did not abstain. They recused themselves from the matter. So that's very different than abstaining.
Thank you. That's what you're going to say. So, Jonathan, do you have a comment?
Thank you. I just want to point out that I appreciate Mr. Pucci's concession. about the timeliness of the appeal. I do want to note that the approved minutes reflect not only that the motion to approve did not carry 2-2, and it was Coombs, by the way, who was acting chair that day, not Camp, as Ray mentioned. There was, you'll see in bold on the minutes, motion to hold for revisions. Well, that carried 4-0. So the appellants not only had a good reason to believe that the motion to approve did not carry, but also that there would be further hearings and revisions to the plan. And so that's one of the irregularities of this this whole situation.
Thank you. Okay, well, just want to give an opportunity for Holly or Abby to say anything at this point. There'll be more opportunities if you're not ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just notate, I have, as a staff liaison, as preservation planner, I've assisted in the writing of the letter to you all to give the merits of what occurred on the record. So I just wanted to mention that I'm assisting in lieu of not having an HDC compliance coordinator at the moment. So just want to mention that. Thank you.
Okay. Margaret, see your hand up. Sorry, the digital hand blended into your yellow wall. Sorry, I didn't see it.
Thank you. Well, respectfully, town council's advice on this may well have been erroneous in respect to Robert's rules. The chair calls a vote. And in this case, Chairwoman Coombs called the vote and said the motion did not carry. Neither of the people who voted to approve the certificate and the project at that point called a point of order or objected. And immediately after that, one of the persons, Ms. Thornwell, who had voted in favor of approving it, made a motion to hold it for further revisions. And that's really effectively a rescission of or reconsideration of the previous vote. So I really just want to point out that this is not a clear cut, hey, this was the vote, but no one at that meeting, not the board, not the applicant's representative, nor anyone in the public believed that this had actually been approved.
Thank you. So any other comments before we go to the public? Each side has had a couple chances to talk. We can go to the public and then I can come back to the appellant and HGC. Anything else from the HGC before we go to the public? Matt?
Yeah, can I ask someone who sat on it what their intent was? Can I ask Abby or someone
Sure.
who was there? What was the HDC intent of the vote? Did you intend to pass it or not?
Sorry, I was muted. This is Abby Camp. I think I was the third person to vote because I think John McLaughlin made the motion and then Carrie went along with voting to put it through. And then I was on the fence about it because I was still hoping it would go back for one more revision. And that would be to bring it down another foot, or Mrs. Thornwell what suggested that it go for a variance and get a push further to the north, which would help the way the building sits on the site. So that's why I abstained, thinking I was saying no. And I think Mrs. Coombs, the acting chair, also had still had reservations about passing the building. I mean, it was a very difficult application I won't go into it because one of the things I just thought of is if they keep this hot dog stand, that is, yes, from, I guess, turn of the century, what is the fate of this building? I mean, who's going to take care of it? Angus MacLeod, who is a very sensitive architect to Sconset, was going to put on this site a structure that was like the old fishing shacks that Margaret Van Dusen so well showed us, those pictures of the codfish in the turn of the century. So it's a very complicated, and he brought it down as much as it can, but the problem was that in each revision, the top of the roof sort of peeked over Front Street, and I think that caused the neighbors to be alarmed. I mean, it's a tiny, I don't even know if it's 500 square feet, but what the architect had proposed. It was a very difficult decision. So I abstained, Diane abstained, thinking that we were going to get one more chance to look at this, to see if we couldn't shave off somewhere and make this work. So we thought that the motion, I think when Diane said that did not pass, she was really thinking that those two abstentions was a tie and therefore it did not pass, because we were thinking that you needed, three people, there was a tie, so it didn't pass. So that's when a motion was made by Carrie Thornwell. We were all thinking, and without being, nothing behind it, saying, let's hold for one more revision. So that's sort of the temperature of the of what happened. And I don't speak very well, so anybody can ask me a question if they wish.
Thank you, Abby. We might have another question for you soon. Thank you. Okay, we'll go to the public. If everybody could be brief, because usually once the public speaks, then appellant and HCC want to talk as well. So we'll go to Linda Williams. She has her hand up.
There we go. With all due respect, Mr. Chairman, you haven't heard from all sides. I believe the property owner's attorney is here, as well as the property owner, to clarify some of the misstatements that were made earlier. I'm dealing with the ZBA part of this, but I think it's only fair for the applicants, the owner's attorney and the owner to have a chance to speak, as long as the appellants. So I'm going to turn it over, with your permission, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Wilson and Christy Amadori.
Yeah, well, Mike Wilson has his hand up, and I'll get to everybody who wants to speak. There's no issues there.
So I can only say that the applicant, the owner of the property, did not start this mess. They thought they had to go back. They were told by town council, not Mr. Pucci. The attorney Giorgio was the one who rendered the decision that was given to us and to the staff and to the appellants. And we relied on that as an approval. And the appellants didn't file within those 10 days that everybody is used to, those 10 days. And after the minutes were filed, they didn't file within the 10 days. So I'm not exactly sure what the other attorney is talking about. But someone else can clarify that. But it wasn't done within the 10 days of the minutes being filed at the town clerk, which is what the act requires. The act doesn't talk about intent. The act doesn't talk about any of that stuff. You have to, under the act, file within 10 days of the minutes being filed, or the decision, quote unquote, being filed at the town clerk. That was not done. So I'm not sure where this jurisdiction comes for the board, the select board, to decide on the the merits. Plus, you can't substitute your own judgment for whatever the judgment were of those two members that voted in favor of it. So when this came down, we said, oh, okay, I guess it's an approval, and off we went. And off to the ZBA we went for a minimal intrusion into the setback for a special permit. The comment made earlier by Ms. Camp about going for a variance to the ZBA is not really appropriate, because the ZBA probably would not have granted it, because what that means is that the owner created the hardship, and they're not going to give a variance for something that the owner can do something else not to get a variance. So that was not going to happen. So I will defer to Mike Wilson and Christy Amendolari.
Thank you, Linda. Up next is Attorney Wilson.
Thank you, Chair Bridges. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
And can you see me?
Cannot see you, but we can hear you fine.
Okay, I don't know how to put the camera on, but I've tried.
That's okay.
I think first it's important to acknowledge the legal opinion provided by Town Council, Attorney John Giorgio, dated October 25th, 2021 at 11:50 a.m. He's very clear that the vote was sufficient, and he was very clear that the calculation to determine the vote was an approval was also provided for, looks like Ms. Snell, Mr. Vorst, Ms. Gibson to consider, because they're all CC'd on the email. I think another important thing that we need to establish is that this application was in fact approved. I think Attorney Giorgio agrees, and Town Council, who is present here tonight, also agrees, as does Mr. Pohl from the HDC. It's important for the board to understand that no HDC member voted against this application. And I think that's something that ought to be strongly weighted. And I don't think it's fair to second guess or ask for the intent of the board when it's clear that nobody voted against it. The intent was to approve it because 2 people voted to approve it. So that brings us, if we can establish that this application was approved on the date of the vote by a 2-0 vote, we're now left with the question whether the appellants were timely. And while I disagree with Town Council today, and I don't understand how we can rely on Town Council when we get 2 different opinions on the same issue, I find that problematic to begin with. But if the board is inclined to go along with Town Council's revised opinion being offered today that this appeal was timely, and again, I don't agree it was, and I don't believe the law supports that at any level, you're then left with the limited option of considering, was the approval arbitrary or capricious? And the board, the select board, is then left with reviewing the administrative record. And I thank you, Chair Bridges, for pointing out that what has been submitted today by Attorney Van Dusen, while incredibly interesting, and I too love history, and certainly those pictures were beautiful, they're not supposed to be submitted and they should not be considered. But I don't think we should be here at all. So since those pictures were posted and you all looked at them and you can't unsee them, I think it's very important to take a look at every one of those pictures of Codfish Park, specifically the second one, depicts the structure immediately adjacent to my client as a 1.5-story structure. I don't think you should consider that because it's not part of the administrative record, but what you do have in your administrative record is the application and all of the materials that were submitted in support of the application. So if, again, we're proceeding on the theory that this was approved because legally it was, and that we're somehow here allowing these appellants to appeal even though the law says they were not timely, you are given the benefit of a lot of information, a lot of photographs, and a lot of approvals by this Historic District Commission for structures immediately adjacent to and within the very near surrounding neighborhood of the application, all showing very similar architectural elements. So how you can consider the approval of a 2-0 vote as being arbitrary or capricious as it relates to all of the material that the Historic District Commission had before them, and to now supplement perhaps your expertise as a select board over that of the Historic District Commission, I don't see that you've done that in the past. I don't know that it's a route you want to head. It seems to be a slippery slope to me. So I would ask first that you not consider this as a timely appeal. But if you do, you have to acknowledge that, as the law does, the vote was an approval. And so now the appellants are appealing the approved application, and nothing in the application would suggest that the HDC acted in an arbitrary or capricious manner in its approval, because they had so much information available to them to approve it as it relates to these architectural features in Codfish Park. So thank you for your time, and I'm certainly willing to address any additional questions if there are.
Jason?
Sure, Mr. Pucci.
Jason, I apologize. I know you go in an order. I just want to correct one thing.
Sure.
That's important to correct. I'm not going to address any of the substantive presentation, but there aren't two different opinions from town council. And you know, I don't appreciate that representation from the permit holders council. I agree 100%, of course, with my law partner, John Giorgio's opinion about the two vote, you know, members present and voting, and John's opinion, which again speaks for itself from October. John did not opine on the timeliness of this appeal. So I just want to clarify that. There's no differing opinion. I agree with John's opinion, which again speaks for itself. And the only thing that I'm saying with regard to that is it presents a reasonable argument that I think a court could accept, that the appeal is timely because the appellants did not have notice that the application was treated as approved. That's the only thing that I've opined on. There's no difference in my opinion and John's prior opinion. So I just wanted to note that for you. And you know, I'm not hearing any case law being cited in opposition to that timeliness opinion. And again, I'm not saying that I call that like you have to follow what I'm saying as black letter law. What I'm saying is, in my opinion, there's a reasonable chance that if this issue was addressed by a court, that the court would find that the appeal is timely under the circumstances as being filed within 10 days of the appellant's notice of that it had been treated as an approval. But that's all I'm saying. So I just wanted to clarify that there is no difference between the opinions presented to you from town council.
Yeah, I think we understand, George. I understand your opinion and Mr. Wilson's opinion, and you know, I'm fine with that. Mike, I see your hand up, but we also have other people who haven't spoke yet. So can we go to Kathy Arve?
Sorry, unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, it's Joe Arve on my wife's computer. Kathy's right here.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. I guess the comments by the builder's attorney with how this seems to dovetail right into the rest of the structures close by, then can you explain to me why there were 22 letters of people from Sconset, and more importantly, the Sconset Civic Association, who's never rendered an opinion on something like this, wrote a very strong letter saying this was just inappropriate. And it just seems to me on the face of things, that precise location with that size of lot, have a house fill the entire lot and be over 2 times as high is just plain inappropriate. It's like an elephant in the room and we're going round and round. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe and Kathy. Just to remind us, at all HCC appeals, we have to make a determination if this is an arbitrary, capricious decision on the HCC. And as someone said, not put our opinions in for the HDC, regardless of where we feel on the actual issue. Where do we want to go from here, board? Do we want to do the appellant send one more round for some rebuttals? Just trying to take a temperature. Don, Melissa, Matt. Do you have any questions for anybody here? Because once we close the public hearing, we can talk with town council. Just want to give an opportunity. Melissa, go ahead.
Thanks, Jason. Can we just get reminded what our options for decision are tonight? Is it simply to remand it back to the HDC? And would that be because we do find the decision arbitrary, capricious? Just want to make sure I understand exactly what our parameters are tonight and what we'll be deciding to do, what our choices are.
Yeah, George, you want to do that, or you want to give me a shake at it?
Why don't you try first?
Well, we can remand it, or we can deny the appeal, and then I think those are the two choices. Our remand is one of 2 choices, correct, George?
Yes, the appellants, the relief that they're specifically requesting from you is to vacate the certificate of approval and remand for a new hearing, basically. And that would be something that would be within your authority to do if you were to find a substantive basis for doing that.
Okay, Matt?
Yeah, George, I'm not sure, could a substance basis be that the intent was not to approve and that the vote wasn't arbitrary, but the approval afterward was arbitrary because it was opposite, what the intent of the board was?
I think that, getting into the intent of the board members would be kind of an improper inquiry. I mean, typically, I would argue the opposite to a court is that it's deliberative process. You don't get into that type of inquiry. But having said that, you make a valid point about if there was confusion on the record and people were confused what they were voting on, the keeper of the minutes was confused as to what they were recording. And even if not confused, if they were perfectly lucid on what they were recording, and then you get a subsequent opinion that nobody knew about at the time, that it turned out that the 2 votes constituted an approval. That type of confusion and irregularity would be sufficient grounds to send it back.
Because that's what I'm thinking. It's clear to me that they wouldn't have held it for revisions if they thought they had just approved it. It's clear to me that there was confusion, and I would like, personally, as one member, I would like to write it up and remand it back.
Any other comments from the board? Okay. So it's okay, everybody. We're gonna go back to public comment, and then after that, I see 3. I'm gonna keep it to those 3, and then come back and let both sides chat a little again, and then at some point we have to close the public hearing and make a decision. So we go to Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Chair Bridges. To address Select Member Fee's position or question, the town council made it clear in their opinion, it's in your packet, that the motion to hold for revisions was legally moot. The law prohibited that motion, therefore that vote should not be considered by this board. The board should consider that it was a unanimous decision to approve this application, 2-0. And the board ought to inquire, since town council provided this legal opinion that our town tax dollars pay for on October 25th at 11:50 a.m., how an appeal filed in December is timely, or what the appellant's claim was their source of notice. Because if you were to allow that, you're penalizing the applicant who went through procedural process that was done openly, not as they suggest, a violation of the open meeting law, and it was done unanimously. So to now say that because there was confusion about who wrote the minutes, questions the substantive decision of the majority of the HDC on whether these architectural elements were approvable, it's two ships passing in the night. You have to look at the administrative record and what the HDC had before them when they made the vote. They have before them, and you have before you, a great number of HDC approvals for the exact architectural elements that were approved on this one, on the September vote, and then confirmed on October 25th. So why is it appropriate to hold the property owner hostage when on October 25th, the town was advised by town council that this was an approval? And where was the breakdown for Mr. Fitch from October 25th, arguably, to file his appeal? But all that being procedural, you really need to take a look as a board at what the HDC had before them and the number of approved HDC applications with these same architectural elements. And then you need to decide that this unanimous vote somehow was not consistent with all of the other HDC approvals in the neighborhood. And I don't know how a board in good conscience can look at all of those HDC approvals and say that this approval is somehow arbitrary or capricious. That doesn't stand. But I think it's important for the appellants to explain why they waited till December when town council made it very clear on October 25th that this was an approval. And I think you need to be, you need to rest on solid ground that the law prohibits the 4-0 motion because it's legally moot. And if you're trying to now impose what your intent is or what you think the HDC's intent is, well, that's not following the law either. And somewhere this process ought to comply with and follow the law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Can we go to Henrietta Courier? I'll get to you, Jonathan, and try to get through. All right, I'm seeing lots of hands go up, so I'm going to need everyone to be very brief so I can get to everybody in fairness. That's what I'm, excuse me, I'm not trying to shorten anyone's time, but I want to try to hear from everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Bridges. This is Rhett Courier, and I'd like to reiterate what Matt Fee said and what Joe Arve said. Whether was arbitrary and capricious, just by taking a walk on Sconset Beach and looking over to the project this summer, I thought, what the hell is that? So it, and then listening in the last, I haven't followed this at all, except I came on today because I was like, this is still going on. Clearly it was mucked up. And whether the people who decided on the HDC to abstain as opposed to voting against it because they thought it would come back with another revision, clearly it had the effect of being arbitrary. And, you know, the only way to hurry, I mean, we've already held up the landowner this long. Maybe, you know, send it back to the HDC and let's see what they can do. You know, figure it out. This is just, anyway, so I kind of like Matt's approach to it, and I couldn't agree more with Joe Arve's approach, his comments either. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhett. Can we go to Linda Williams?
Sort of, I'm trying to organize my thoughts on this after decades involved with the HDC, 20 on the HDC. That I think this is setting a very bad precedent if you do not acknowledge that it was a favorable vote. No one's arguing about that. Because that would open, I just worry about the fact that they clearly missed the 10 days. Ignorance is not a defense, either by the chairman at the time, the person who was taking the minutes, or the neighbors. It's incumbent upon neighbors to check in with whatever's going on. I understand this is sort of a unique situation, but Attorney Pucci's argument or comments about the fact that he would think that a court of law would support their argument about timely. I don't know when they found out. I don't know if they said within 10 days. How do you prove that? Within 10 days that they filed the appeal, within the 10 days of when they found out that the ruling had come down and it was approved. No one has mentioned those dates here. No one has said they timely filed within 10 days of that. Where this could lead if you don't support the HDC's positive vote and not remand it, I'm not sure you can legally remand it, is that anybody at any time can decide that they didn't pay attention to any application. We get a lot of this in the spring when people come back from away and all of a sudden there's a house or an addition or a pool or something next door to them. I wasn't aware, didn't know, and it could be 8 months after the approval and then they can say, oh, I didn't find out until just yesterday when I came back to the island for the summer. Is that going to be supported in court? This is a very slippery slope, and I don't advise the select board to start this precedent that whenever you find out, no matter how contentious the issue was to begin with, you can come in and claim that you didn't know and claim the 10 days from the day you got off the boat. This is not the way this is supposed to work in the act or on the appeal type. So I caution remanding this. And you should overturn it. Obviously, I have very biased here after all these years of dealing with HDC. You should not allow the appeal. You should uphold the first vote that was taken, making the second vote moot. So there was no arbitrary and capricious because the chairman and the minute taker made a mistake. That is not the property owner's problem. This could keep going and this could cause very bad things for the HDC Act and process and policy if this goes to court. So I'm just cautioning you to do that, not send it back and overturn the appeal and support the original vote of the HDC. I just see very bad precedent. And if we open this door, I foresee all these people coming back in May and there's a house next to them coming in and say, I didn't know, so I'm going to appeal.
Thank you, Linda. Well said. Thank you. Appreciate it. Can we go to Lisa Schroeder? We'll try to get through. I see 4 hands up. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, good evening. This is Lisa Soder. I live at 13 Broadway, and I just wanted to join my neighbors, some of whom have spoken and who are the appellants. Given the uniqueness of this situation and due to the inconsistency in the reporting of the HDC vote, which itself, which was first misreported, and it resulted in the inability of the appellant to know that they even needed to appeal. So I joined my neighbors in asking the board to vacate the certificate of approval by the HDC and to remand it for a new hearing permitting the appeal.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
John Shea. Just waiting for John to unmute. It looks like he's ready to go.
I beg your pardon. Sorry,
There you are.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Hello.
Go
Hi.
ahead.
I'm speaking really as a private citizen, although I am aware that the Wisconsin Civic Association did write a letter, urging the HGC to pay special attention to this most sensitive part of Wisconsin. Really at the heart of Wisconsin, as you walk through the village and you walk past the market and you go down to the park, you walk down Middle Gully Road, and for several hundred years, you've walked down Middle Gully Road and had a view of the ocean and just, the symmetry and the history that it's been. And so, and I also know that Angus MacLeod, this architect, is a brilliant architect. And I know that there's a solution that would make everybody happy. And I know that the HGC, in their 4-0 vote at the end of that night on September 7th, and I listened to 3.5 hours at that meeting on my drive down the East Coast to Falmouth, I was cheered by the fact that they were going back for revisions, because this is one of the most sensitive areas on the island, and I would say in America. And so therefore, I would urge the board to send it back. What does it really matter? To send it back, as I think that the board suggested when they asked for more revisions, and see whether or not the architect and the owner and the village of Wisconsin can come to a satisfactory and creative solution. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Can we go to Janet Baloo? Sorry if I mispronounced that last name.
Janet Ballou. I'm over on Front Street. I reiterate that this is a significant structure change. These are not architectural elements. This is at least doubling the square footage of a small house at the bottom of Middle Gully Road. I think the reason it becomes so significant is that little by little by little, Sconset and Codfish Park in the historic district are being changed. People who really want a 4-bedroom house are buying fishermen's shacks or candy stores, and they're converting them into what they want. That is something apart from the question I wanted to ask. Was it absolutely clear to everyone on the board of the HDC? Because everybody said it was unanimous. Now, somehow, Latin 1, animus, spirit or mind, unanimous of 4 people. If 2 are thumbs up and the other 2 are not thumbs up, in my understanding of unanimous, this is not unanimous. And I just wanted to ask if it was absolutely clear to all the members sitting in on this vote, if an abstention meant a vote against. And that's all I wanted to say. This is a very...
Oh, sorry, Janet, I got cut off there. Dawn, you have your hand up?
Yes, I'm at the point where I have to say something. All of the members of the HDC are elected officials who've been on the board for a number of years, who should be very familiar with the way that votes are taken and how they operate. And I'm sorry that if there was confusion, but they should have taken a new motion to reconsider their vote. That this is just, it's not appropriate for that to be coming to us on this basis. That it's very clear that that was a favorable vote. There were two votes in favor and two that didn't, that essentially chose to not cast a vote. However, I mean, I may have my own opinions about whether it was about the design appropriateness and so forth, but I can't substitute those opinions for the board. And that's what we have to look at. Was there a true procedural error, or was the decision arbitrary and capricious? And there may have been some confusion amongst the board members, but they're going to have to get a better handle on that, because there shouldn't be confusion about how votes are taken at this level.
Thank you, Don. Matt?
Just a question about procedure. Was John Giorgio's decision made public? It wasn't made public the night of vote. When was it made public? And then did the HDC correct their vote in a public meeting? Did they make John's, at a later date, did they make John's, decision public? And did they correct their vote at a public meeting? Which is, I think, the proper procedure, when you've messed up, to say, hey, you know what, we messed up. Here's why. We're gonna make a revote. We're gonna, because I think that's, if that hasn't happened, that should have happened.
Does anybody know if that did happen? Holly or Esmeralda?
No, Mr. Chair, that did not happen under the previous HDC compliance coordinator.
Okay. Jonathan, I know you've had your hand a couple times. I'm going to the last comment of the attendees, and then we have to start moving on. I'm starting to hear repetitive things, which I know are important, but go to Pamela Swan, and then Jonathan, I'll go to you next.
Okay, Jason, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I, of course, echo John Shea's sentiments and Kathy and John Arve. I live at 2 Broadway, and I will say that there was immense confusion, because when the initial vote happened, I was told by various neighbors and people who were, looking at the minutes, that it had not passed because of the 2 abstentions and because of that vote right underneath it with the 4. We didn't know that vote didn't count. Most of the public thought that this had not passed. So there definitely was not clear communication to the people in the neighborhood. Obviously, I think this was filed timely in terms of when we all found out about it. And I really appreciate the board looking at this, because for those of us who have been in Sconset for years and years, this is a pretty important matter. And unfortunately, if they do this with one house, it's going to start happening all throughout Codfish Park. And pretty soon, the whole nature of the landscape there will change, and it won't be for the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. Jonathan, Fitch? I'll get to you next, Don.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, we still haven't seen Mr. Giorgio's opinion. We had no idea that such an opinion was given. It wasn't published. The public was unaware of what occurred. And as far as we know, the HDC was unaware. They didn't call a meeting to clean up the record and let the public know what was going on. There were just so many irregularities. Most importantly, the clear intention of the commission and the understanding of the public that this was going to be continued. So just in a nutshell, I think that the irregularities are so extreme that it warrants the Board of Selectmen to remand this matter to the HDC for further hearings. And yes, under the law, you can do that. I gave you a copy of the case of Montgomery versus the Board of Selectmen of Nantucket, which you're probably familiar with. But in that decision, it was challenged whether the board had the ability to remand in considering a certificate of appropriateness. And the appeals court said, yes, it did. It decided to remand based on the record of the certificate of appropriateness. The first time around, it remanded it back to the commission. The commission made a further decision. As Ms. Williams is in particular familiar with, as having been on the commission at that time. So it's just common sense. You do have the opinion of Mr. Pucci that there's sufficient basis for you to remand based on the obvious irregularity and confusion in the record, and what the board, you've heard from Ms. Camp, what the board was thinking, what they thought that they were doing. And so that's all I have to say. We did not know until the ZBA hearing on 8 Bank Street. It was basically disclosed at that point that there was supposedly a certificate of appropriateness that had been approved, and nobody knew about it.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. So if my board members are okay, I'd like to go to Mr. Wilson and then give the HGC something to say, and then we'll close the public hearing, and then we can discuss. We go to Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Chair Bridges. I think you are being misled by intentional suggestions that make you confused about the issue before you. So if this is a timely appeal of an approved certificate of appropriateness, the board has to make a decision that the approval was arbitrary as compared to the architectural elements that were previously approved. It had the basis for the determination of arbitrary and capricious has absolutely nothing to do. It does not consider at any level the confusion of the public. That goes to their argument that the appeal was timely. And while I disagree with that, it seems as though town council has now said it's timely. So you have to look at, was their approval arbitrary? Not because of confusion about when the public was made aware of the October 25th legal decision. No, it's about whether the architectural elements were approvable. And so your decision has to really be focused on something that the appellant has never brought up. The appellant, through Mr. Fitch or through any of these other pictures or letters or heartfelt expressions, not a single one of them has raised the issue on the substance of the application to say that this ridge height is, if you approve it, which it was, is arbitrarily higher than the ridge height next to it, down the street from it, or across from it. There's not been a single argument presented to this board tonight to suggest that the substance of the application as approved was arbitrary compared to other approvals for architectural elements. And everybody's dancing around this timeliness or notice or confusion. That's not before this board. And and Chair Bridges, I would like to, through you, thank Select Board Holgate for focusing what this board ought to be considering. And I would also ask you to please take a look at truly what you're supposed to be deciding, since it's been determined that you have this appeal before you. It's whether the architectural elements that were approved were arbitrarily or capriciously approved, not that there was some timeliness issue. And that's really what you're looking at. And that's what the law requires you to look at. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anything else from the HGC? Any thoughts or comments before we close the public hearing? Okay, Holly saying no. Esmeralda, no. Okay. All right, I think we heard a lot from all sides. We'll close the public hearing, and now the select board we can discuss. We can ask any clarifying questions to Mr. Pucci. Sometimes other people are going to want to raise their hand and talk, but we've closed the public hearing. We can't do that. So what's the thoughts for the board or pleasure of the board? Matt?
I would like to remand it. The worst that can happen if we remand, I'm not worried about setting a precedent. I assume that this type of administrative mistake does not happen very often. I think I would like to remand it. The worst that can happen is they won't agree and they'll all end up in court anyway, but we've taken one shot at that not happening. Anyway, so that's my motion is for the board to remand it. And and of course we have to have town council help us write it out, but.
So you're making a motion, or you're just saying that you were going?
I'll make a motion for us to remand this.
I would recommend closing the hearing before you start making motions on it.
All right.
We've already closed it. I've already closed the public hearing. Did I not?
I would take a vote on it.
You did, Jason.
Well, you just said it was closed, but you didn't. I don't think you voted to close the
We
public
never
hearing.
do.
You've never voted to close the public hearing. We can start that.
Okay. No, I don't want to make you start something. Typically, I would vote to close the public hearing
No,
and then
the
deliberate.
select board has never done that.
Yeah. If that's best practice, I can start adding it in. Happy to do it.
I don't want to add to your workload.
Well, just really quick, since we know, there's a motion on the, Matt, can you rescind your motion really quick, just so we can go back to?
I rescind my motion.
All right, is there a vote to close the public hearing?
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor, Melissa,
Aye.
Don,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye.
Jason? Aye, that passes. All right. George, you're educating us. It's nice. It's good. Okay, so Matt, you can make your motion again, see if there's a second.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to remand it to HDC.
Is there a second for discussion?
I'll second for discussion.
Okay, any discussion, any questions for Mr. Pucci?
I guess, does George believe that there are sufficient administrative or procedural, I would say, errors?
Well, I have to say, I've given my opinion about the timeliness of the appeal, and unfortunately, a lot of time was spent on that tonight. And there was very little talk about, the substantive merits of the approval, if you consider it an approval in accordance with John's decision, opinion. And if the appeal is timely, then you look at, was the approval arbitrary and capricious? And one of the ways that you can judge that issue, if you think that there was so much confusion in the record before you that you find grounds to say they acted arbitrarily and capriciously, you could vote to affirm the appeal and remand it on that basis. Another issue, though, that I think would be more fruitful for you to consider is, was the substantive decision itself, forget about any type of confusion or anything like that. If you consider it as an approval, was there sufficient evidence to support that approval? And finding that there is insufficient evidence to support the approval would be grounds for you upholding the appeal and finding it arbitrary and capricious. Those words, arbitrary and capricious, are a term of art. They don't mean that the commission was deranged or something like that the words arbitrary and capricious sound like. It's more a term of art that you look, is there sufficient evidence on the record to support the approval? If you find that there is a question that there was not, that would be grounds for affirming the appeal and sending it back as well. So hopefully that clarifies it a little bit further for you.
Well, I think that's interesting because I feel like there was some confusion and there was sufficient evidence to support the approval. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, the other, I guess the question for George, do we also have to vacate the certificate of, do we have to vacate the approval? You know, isn't what if are we remanding something back? You know, if I don't add that to my motion, are we remanding something back that's still working through the pipeline as an approval? Or is this thing on hold? I guess that's for my, where are we now in this process? Is it on hold since this is in place, or is it still moving forward?
That's correct. If you were inclined, and I'm not saying this is the way the board should vote, if you're inclined to affirm the appeal and you are interested in instructing the commission to have a further public hearing on the application, I would recommend putting into your vote, affirm the appeal, vacate the approval, and remand to the commission for a new hearing. That's the way I would frame that.
Right.
And again, I don't take that as my opinion on substantive merits. It isn't.
You're giving Matt an option.
So that's what I would like to do.
So we might need to get that repeated so we all know what we're talking about. Make sure Erica knows what the motion is. And then how do we do that? Is this a friendly to change it?
I'll accept it as a friendly. I'm basically vacating the approval and remanding it back for a revision.
You would also, in that, you'd be, if this is the way you wanted that result, you would move to affirm the appeal, vacate the approval, and remand for a new public hearing.
Yes. That's my motion. You make me sound much more intelligent, George.
Melissa?
Yeah, I realize it's up to me to affirm that second. I'm a little confused about how that's a bit different than what the original motion was. Having a little hard time following that. But I will continue to uphold the second for discussion, and I will.
George, was that just clarifying it more to Melissa's question?
Yes. If Matt thinks that there's sufficient grounds to send this back for a remand hearing, then your motion would be to affirm the appeal, vacate the approval, and send it back for a new public hearing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just what Matt is seeking to do, and I'm just helping to clarify the language.
Yeah, and part of the reason I'm asking that is if we didn't do the vacate, and the upholding and vacating, then we're in a, we made this mistake. It might have been over on the, I've been on the board and made a mistake, and we weren't clear. And I think, making it clear one way or the other, if I had only done half of that motion, we would have been, sort of in this weird halfway place. So I'm doing the whole motion. So, we're taking a position.
Okay. Well, I'm very much struggling because I see the opportunities for improvement in the administrative rollout of the minutes, but I don't believe the decision was arbitrary or capricious when it was voted on. And so I think, the juxtaposition of those two things has got me in a bit of a quandary, and my support of remanding it back to the HDC would perhaps be that if they took a vote and it was more definitive and more clearly posted, and everything was a little clearer, their opinions likely are not to be changed because they did their work, but that's always possible. But the process would be clearer, and to me, that's the crux of the issue that we're debating. That would be the only reason why I could support sending it back to the HDC.
Don?
I mean, I agree with Melissa in many ways. I don't think that the decision itself was arbitrary and capricious in terms of the review, the design review, whether I agree with it or not. That's not for us to decide. But I am concerned about the concerns from a number of people about the clarity of how the decision was made and posted and so forth. But I also don't find it flawed in the degree that warrants to take away from a property owner a properly made decision, even with the lack of clarity.
I think I agree. There was some confusion with how it was put into the minutes. Just to give you my thoughts, I think if there was no confusion, if it was correct and it was still appealed on time, I would still feel there was sufficient evidence to support the approval. So when I think about that, so I agree about the confusion, and I understand, and I'm okay with the appeal coming in, or whether it's timely or not. I think people need a chance to understand it. This is a very, this is definitely a one-off. I don't think it's going to set a bad precedent, as Ms. Williams said. So I think even if there was no confusion, I still would come to the conclusion that there's sufficient evidence to support approval, which is always interesting in these appeals, because you can't substitute your opinion for the HDCs. You have to look at it from 30,000 feet and take your opinion out of it. So that's kind of where I'm at. Mr. Pucci, if this ends in a 2-2 vote, because we don't have our 5th board member, the appeal does not go through, correct? Or does something else happen?
Yes, it would result in a denial of the appeal.
Okay. Not that that's going to change my decision at all, but just want to check on that.
It would result in the denial of the appeal.
Right. It would not be remanded if it's a 2-2 vote. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Hopefully nobody's going to abstain.
I was going to make a joke about that earlier, but
It wasn't meant as a joke. Actually, it was abstaining is probably, I think one thing we can all agree on is, yeah, that's not a great idea, the abstaining.
Mm-hmm.
Recusing is a totally different thing.
Mm-hmm.
But abstaining is tough because it can create confusion.
Any other thoughts? Any clarifying questions for Mr. Pucci? Matt?
Yeah, not a question, but just again, I don't I'm with you, Jason. I don't worry that this is going to set precedent. I believe that the applicant, I believe the neighbors, I believe that they would have opposed this within 10 days if it had been noticed properly. I believe if the minutes were proper, they would have made an appeal right away. And so they didn't have that opportunity until they saw much later that it was, going through, that it was approved. I also find that there's, just for the minutes, I find the fact that, that John Giorgio's opinion hasn't been discussed at an HCC meeting, and that the HCC hasn't, voted on the record and corrected this. If those things had happened, I'd be with you. I'd say, you know what, we did, this happened as soon as the opinion was done. The next meeting, they said, this is the case. That didn't seem to have happened to me. So I just think that, I think we should give them a chance to do that. Give them a chance to do what Melissa is saying. So, and my guess is if we don't, that the neighbors will litigate this anyhow. So,
Okay. Dawn?
My understanding in terms of the HDC clarifying their vote, you can't reconsider a vote at a subsequent meeting. You have to do it at the same meeting. So it should have been caught at that meeting if they were confused about how their decision was made, and they chose not to do that. However, they could have maybe done some clarification at a subsequent meeting, and that would have been appropriate. But regardless, if there had been no confusion, we've accepted the appeal. We're hearing it. We've been doing this for over an hour, and I don't think that a majority of this board, or maybe not, probably not anyone in this board, actually thinks that their decision-making process was flawed in terms of being arbitrary and capricious. And I think that that's what we really have to look at.
Thank you. Erica, did you have a clarification? Okay. Matt?
I'm not sure that this, I don't know if I agree with that, Don. I'm not sure the decision process was, they were in agreement. They all four said, okay, we're gonna hear this again. So clearly there were revisions that they wanted to consider, and they were willing to consider, to get a vote. Because they didn't think that they had voted in approval. They thought they had voted a revision, and they thought they were going to hear it again. And then the applicant, found a way to get an approval without, through the administrative process, not through a board vote. And so I think that's a more dangerous precedent in my mind than, some of the other things that we've been threatened with tonight.
You make a good point, Matt. I also think the opposite of it being really dangerous to go back and hear later what a abstaining vote, what their intent was. And I heard that, and I'm trying to put it out of my mind, not use it as considering. I think that is equally as dangerous, even though I agree with what you said. Was it? Or
No, thank you.
I was just going to suggest we go to a vote.
Okay. So
Jason, I did want to clarify, you have that right too. That's how a court would see it. A court may look procedurally, or were there procedural errors or questions or confusion on the record, but a court would typically deny any type of effort to delve into the intent of someone who voted. That would be an improper inquiry. Typically we would never have a member of a permitting board testify, in any type of court proceeding. It would be considered deliberative process, and you don't look into their intent.
Okay. Is everybody okay with the vote? Do we need to read it back? Or are we okay?
I'm okay with going right to a vote.
Okay. So all those in favor to affirm the appeal and remand and send it back to the HGC for another hearing, please say aye. Or I can say, sorry, Matt Fee. Sorry,
Aye.
Matt.
Aye.
Don?
No.
Melissa?
No.
Jason? No. So that appeal was not approved. Is there any other housekeeping things we need to do, George or Erica? Is that it?
I'll issue a memo tomorrow noting that the HGC appeal was denied and that the vote of the HGC was upheld.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. That was a tough one, and I appreciate everyone's patience and professionalism in their time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, everyone. I've lost my paper. Okay. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Not so fast. Yeah, okay. Melissa?
We got another meeting tomorrow.
Yeah. Aye.
Dawn?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Jason? Aye. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Aye.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.